Chapter 995. In front of the Empress Hua Palace, the 7 Buddhas were fighting against the Yellow Emperor Xinyuan, the Flame Emperor Shenong, and 5 Tao-fusing experts of the Holy Alliance. The 5 experts of the Holy Alliance all maintained the original characteristics of the Chaos Fiend Celestial. Some had horns on their heads, while others had scales on their faces. Although 99% of them were in human form, they would intentionally leave behind some special characteristics to show off their origin. The one with a spiral horn sticking out from between his eyebrows and boundless heat radiating from his body was the Chaos Fiend Celestial, Guangzhu. The one with a pair of black wings on his back, each feather made of black flames, was the Chaos Fiend Celestial, Yanwu. The one with a beautiful face, a fragrant body, and countless bamboo shadows in the void with each strike was the Fiend Celestial, Zhuqing. The one with a hideous face, a long golden nose, and 2 fangs sticking out of his mouth was the Fiend Celestial, Daemon. Only one head could be seen clearly. The one with disheveled hair and an extremely long colorful waterfall of light was the Fiend Celestial, Wu Wu. Among the 5 Tao-fusing experts, Guangzhu was also known as the Bright Sage. He was very active and liked to stir up trouble. If an important minister of the Celestial Court or a Buddha of the Buddhist League was accidentally beaten black and blue while traveling and couldn't find the culprit, it was usually him who did the dirty work. Yanwu was also known as the Great Feather God. Among the 18 sages of the Holy Alliance, he was the loneliest. He didn't have any relatives or disciples. His favorite thing to do was to wander around. Today, he would stay at one friend's house for a few eons, and tomorrow he would go to another friend's house for a few yuan hui. He didn't even have a fixed nest, and he was always flapping his wings and flying around. Zhu Qing was also known as Mother Qing. She had a noble and pure personality, and her heart couldn't be any kinder. She would often transform into thousands of clones and roam the world. If weak creatures like cats and dogs were injured or were being chased, she would help them. At this moment, she was a kind mother. However, if any unlucky person dared to provoke her with their strength, she would immediately let them understand how pitiful it was to have a tigress as a mother. She would rule them so that they would not dare to forget this tragic experience even after reincarnation. All the saints called Daemon, Lord of Strength. This guy's true form was a 6-legged, 6-fanged, golden-nosed behemoth born in the chaos. He was born with a tremendous power that could make people despair. If it was purely a tug-of-war of physical strength, the 16 old monsters of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Taoist patriarchs would not be as strong as him even if they combined their strength. He was a simple-minded person who loved to wrestle with strength. Anyone who dared to use the word Herculean in the heavenly cycle world would be immediately beaten up by him. In the past, Buddhism had various titles such as the Herculean King Kong and the Herculean Heavenly King. However, since those unlucky guys had all their bones broken by Daemon, the successive Buddhist patriarchs simply removed the word Herculean from the titles of Buddhism. As for Wu Wu, his original form was a ball of colorful light that contained all kinds of heterogeneous energy. He called himself the Flower Lord and loved to plant all kinds of strange flowers and plants. His nest was a vast sea of flowers. Although he did not accept disciples, the various spiritual monsters that cultivated from flowers and trees in his nest treated him as their parents. If one were to ask who had the most disciples among the 18 saints of the Sanctuary Alliance, it would naturally be Wu Wu. 5 mighty figures of the Tao-fusing realm, together with the 2 new Tao-fusing saints, the Yellow Emperor Xinyuan and the Yen Emperor Shenong, the 7 of them were fighting against the 7 Buddhist patriarchs. However, at the level of the Tao-fusing realm, they could not just draw their swords and attack like ordinary cultivators. Instead, they stood in the void and attacked each other with their divine powers and secret techniques. For example, the Buddhist divine powers cultivated by the 7 Buddhist patriarchs had reached an unfathomable level. When they attacked, there was not even a trace of light and shadow. If one was not careful, they would be hit by their spells. The 14 of them were divided into 2 groups and stood frozen with a distance of tens of thousands of miles between them. Occasionally, there was a flash of light in the corner of their eyes and the tip of their eyebrows. Strange ripples flashed across their bodies. with them as the center, the void within a radius of tens of thousands of miles in the heavens beyond heaven fluctuated like boiling rice porridge. However, the frequency of the fluctuation was extremely slow, but the space was extremely distorted as if it would break at any time. However, it maintained such a delicate balance that it would never really break. From time to time, strange phenomena such as lotus flowers, Bodhi trees, clear springs, and golden clouds would appear around the 7 Buddhist patriarchs. Heavenly dragons, fairies, vajras, and other Buddhist holy spirits were faintly discernible. The chanting of Buddhist scriptures could be heard. Sometimes, the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan and the Yen Emperor Shennong, who had the weakest cultivation base, would suddenly retreat for tens of thousands of miles, blood dripping from the corners of their mouths. Occasionally, strange phenomena such as strong light, flying, bamboo shadows, and black holes would appear around the 7 Buddhist patriarchs. Every time, there was a great danger. If a Tao breaking or Tao reasoning expert were to appear here, he or she would be smashed into pieces in an instant. The battle had been going on for several years. For Tao fusing realm experts, several years was just a short moment that was not even enough to take a breath. However, during these years, 6 of the Great Spirit Vulture Mountains had been breached, and only the Thunder Sound Mountain remained intact. Suddenly, Damon's voice rang out, "Ha, old bald bastard, your disciples are screaming miserably. If you don't rush out now, you'll really be hopeless. Ayaya, how many bald heads are chopped off every day?" That head rolling on the ground was truly a sight to behold. It was truly marvelous, truly marvelous. Twisting his fat body, the long nose on his face curled up proudly, Damon provoked them proudly, "How about I fight you with one hand? If the 7 of you can defeat me with one hand, I'll let you leave here." The 7 Buddhist patriarchs were so angry that they almost vomited blood. Competing with Damon in strength? Why don't you compete with the 7 Buddhist patriarchs in chanting scriptures? The hearts of the Buddhist patriarchs were boiling with anger. Their disciples were suffering, but as Buddhist patriarchs, they really could not spare the time to save them. The Buddhist League, which was caught unprepared, suffered extremely heavy losses. This debt of blood would be recorded on Damon and the others. On the other side of the heavens beyond heaven, in front of the gate of Empress was Palace. The Wahuang clan, with the myriad spirit cauldron on her head, was besieged by the 9 Daozu. None of the 9 Daozu came with their true bodies. Their true bodies had to guard the primordial Dao Palace and protect their disciples. At the same time, they had to suppress the list of deification, preventing the souls in the list of deification from wreaking havoc, and preventing any mistakes from happening to the list of deification. Each of them had created a nascent divinity doppelganger, which rushed into the heavens beyond heaven to settle scores with the Wahuang clan. The Wahuang clan had schemed against them for so many years. Even the first disciple of Long Eyebrow Taoist Scarlet, was a spy planted by the Wahuang clan. Not to mention how many people in the Tao League were actually planted by the Wahuang clan in advance. The 9 Daozu gnashed their teeth in hatred. Instead of cleaning up the mess and killing the fiend celestials of the 33 heavens, they came directly to the Wahuang clan. In the hearts of the 9 Daozu, they also had the idea of using the power of the fiend celestials to weaken the Buddhist League. After all, the 9 Daozu's true bodies were still guarding the primordial Tao Palace. No matter how powerful the fiend celestials were, they could not attack the Daoyu Ocean. However, the Buddhist League was different. The 7 Buddhist ancestors were entangled in the heavens beyond heaven, and 6 of the Great Grimoire Mountain's peaks had been breached. As long as the last peak, Mount Thunderclap, was breached, it would be the merciful and wonderful kindness of the Buddha. Therefore, the 9 Daozu doppelgangers each had 70% of their true body's strength. The 9 of them joined forces to besiege the Wahuang clan, but they did not spare any manpower to help the 7 Buddhist ancestors escape. In fact, as long as 2 or 3 of them were sent to suppress Emperor Huang Xianyuan and the rest, the 7 Buddhist ancestors could immediately escape the heavens beyond heaven and return to the Great Grimoire Mountain to take charge of the situation. However, the Daozu could not wait for more monks to die. They pretended that they did not see the 7 Buddhist ancestors' awkward situation and only focused on besieging the Wahuang clan. The Tao ancestor naturally could not attack with sword light and lightning flashing in the sky. That kind of murderous method would embarrass them for no reason. The 9 Daozu trapped the Wahuang clan in the direction of the 9 palaces. They sat down cross-legged and recited the mantra of virtue and virtue. Word by word, each word turned into a lotus of different colors that drifted down. Each lotus contained an enormous power that an ordinary Tao-breaking expert could only obtain after cultivating for a period of time. The lotuses fell like grinding wheels, grinding away the Wahuang clan's defensive spirit light. The 10,000 spirit cauldron hovering above the Wahuang clan's head emitted beams of light to protect her, but the light was being ground away layer by layer. The 9 of them were attacking her together. Even though she had the 10,000 spirit cauldron, the original spirit treasure of Pangu world, she was still no match for the 9 Daozu. From time to time, the long-browed Taoist mocked the Wahuang clan. He claimed that he only wanted the Wahuang clan to give him justice, and he wanted the Wahuang clan to tell the 9 Daozu how many other people, like Scarlet Taoist, were hiding in the Tao League. The long-browed Taoist told the Wahuang clan clearly that this time, she had completely infuriated the 9 Daozu, and they had to suppress the Wahuang clan. With the power of the 9 clones, they could certainly suppress the Wahuang clan forever by sacrificing a supreme artifact of primal. When that time came, the Wahuang clan would still not be able to protect the human race, and the 9 Daozu could take their time to clean up the mess, kill all the fiend gods of the outer domains, and continue with the deification plan. Just as the long-browed Taoist was nagging, a flame rushed out of his back. Great horns suddenly flashed out from behind him and gave the Taoist a hard kick on the back of the head. The Taoist howled miserably and fell forward, and the 9 palaces formation of the 9 Daozu disintegrated immediately. The Wahuang clan's eyes flickered with a bright gleam as the 10,000 spirit cauldron smashed the Taoist 108 times in a row, bruising his face and knocking out one of his teeth. Seeing that the 9 Daozu saints had joined hands to help, the 9 Daozu clones turned and fled without saying a word, quickly running to the side of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs. "Don't panic, senior brothers. We're here," cried the Taoist. The 7 Buddhist patriarchs were furious. "You're here now? What were you doing 2 years ago?" With a tacit understanding, both sides stopped fighting. With the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs working together, they had the upper hand in terms of magic power and cultivation base. If they really fought, not even the Wahuang clan and the saints of the Holy Alliance could do anything to them. But if the Wahuang clan really went all out and made things difficult for the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs, the Tao League and the Buddhist League would be in great trouble. After staring at each other for a long time, the Wahuang clan said coolly, "From now on, no Tao-fusing expert is allowed to interfere in anything in Pangu world." The Taoist pondered for a moment, then nodded and said, "Even if the Ling dynasty supported by the Tao League takes the place of Diyu." The Wahuang clan sneered and said, "Why don't we just let them gamble on their own fate? You can't even interfere with these fiend gods from outer domains. If that's the case, your disciples can do whatever they want. As long as they have the ability, so what if Diyu is destroyed?" Both sides pondered for a long time, and then the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs agreed in unison. The saints of the Holy Alliance glanced at the smiling Wahuang clan, blinked their eyes, and nodded in agreement. Chapter 996. On the shore of the East Sea, on a large sandy beach, a black turtle shell, tens of miles in diameter, hovered above a clump of dark fiend flame like a huge wok. Tens of thousands of pitch-black metal stakes were buried on the sandy beach, and a large group of soldiers of the East Sea, clad in fully enclosed armors, were standing next to the metal stakes, shouting in a deep voice from time to time. These soldiers had twisted and ferocious skull masks on their faces, and their armors had sharp edges and strange lines, giving them an evil look. Furthermore, these armors were not forged from metal, but formed from some kind of living tissue. If one stared at these armors for a long time, one would have a feeling that these armors were slowly wriggling, sending a chill up one's spine from the soles of one's feet. When Wu Qi returned to the East Sea City, he saw this strange scene on the sandy beach outside the city. It had been nearly 10 years since he last returned to the East Sea City, and Wu Qi was shocked. How could there be such a group of strange soldiers in the East Sea? Every metal stake on the sandy beach was guarded by tens of soldiers, and there were at least 1 million of these soldiers in strange armors on the sandy beach. What they were cultivating was not the real cultivation technique of the human race, but some kind of evil divine ability that was a mixture of puppet fiend cultivation technique and human cultivation technique. Wu Qi opened his primordial Dharma eyes and gave them a glance. The fleshly bodies of these soldiers had transformed into strange half-living, half-dead, half-illusory and half-real existences. He took out the book of life and death and shone it on these soldiers, and all their information was sent back to him. Their lifespan was still limited, but their lifespan had been extended from about 100 years to 3 periods. On top of that, they did not consume any spirit fruits or medicines, and this was all caused by the cultivation technique they were cultivating. Their souls had become incredibly strong, and their half-illusory bodies had basically merged with their souls, giving them a powerful magic power that human soldiers lacked. What shocked Wu Qi even more was that the souls of these soldiers had formed an organic whole like the internet. Their souls were connected as one, which gave them a very strong divine sense attack and defense, as well as an impeccable combination of attack and defense. When over 1 million soldiers were connected, their souls could almost withstand the divine sense attack of a primordial expert. Wu Qi could not help but grimace. This army was so terrifying that the ordinary East Sea army would not be able to withstand a single blow from them. As for their armors, they were wriggling like living creatures, filled with an immense evil aura, and had all kinds of profound secrets that even Wu Qi could not see through. They were the products of some unique mystic system from the outer heavenly realms, completely different from the Tao of artifact crafting that Wu Qi was familiar with. Tens of thousands of fiend gods from the outer realms were tied to the metal stakes, but now, these cruel and violent fiend gods were crying like lambs, wailing and begging for mercy in all kinds of dialects. Although their language was different from that of Pangu continent, their powerful divine sense could directly convey the message they wanted to express, and their twisted faces fully revealed their despair and fear. These huge fiend gods were tied to the metal poles. If they moved a little too much, the East Sea soldiers, who in Wu Qi's opinion were half human and half fiend, would immediately draw their heavy swords and blades and stab at their vulnerable parts. Many fiend gods had their genitals and eyes cut off or stabbed blind. Weeping and trembling, they knelt on the ground like frightened rabbits, not daring to struggle or move. Wu Qi looked blankly at the tens of thousands of fiend gods who were being tortured. What were they doing? How did these unlucky fools get here before the fiend gods from the outer domain invaded Pangu continent? Just as he was wondering, a chuckle rang out. A beam of colorful light emerged over the huge black turtle shell, and Yi Xia revealed herself triumphantly. Slaves, take out the hearts and blood of these poor little things. Be careful, and if you dare to waste even a drop of blood, I'll send you to the Earth Fire Fiend Cave and burn you for 3 years in order to temper your body. Amidst a clanging sound, swords and knives were drawn. Tens of thousands of fiend gods howled miserably as their chests were cut open, and their hearts were taken out. These fiend gods had a strange body structure. Some of them did not have blood in the conventional sense, and naturally did not have organs such as hearts. So, the soldiers removed their energy cores, then squeezed their bodies with some strange method, squeezing out the viscous fluids that emitted strong energy fluctuations in their bodies. Hundreds of thousands of hearts and cores, which were strangely shaped and emitted all kinds of strange flavors of sourness, sweetness, bitterness, spiciness, and stench, were thrown into the black turtle shell, while streams of viscous, colorful blood and body fluids flew into it as well. The fiend flame burned the huge turtle shell, and the strong heat boiled the blood, turning it into a strange dark green color. Gradually, the hearts and cores melted in the blood. Wu Qi was amazed at the sight. Tens of thousands of celestial fiends actually had hundreds of thousands of hearts and cores, and some special species even had aorta that looked like sweet potato vines dangling from their bodies, with hundreds of hearts hanging from them. Coupled with the memories of Yuan Ling in his previous life, this was the first time Wu Qi had seen such a strange race of fiend gods. A large number of cores and hearts melted, and the fiend flame rose. In just a couple of minutes, the blood, hearts, and cores that filled the turtle shell were melted into a pitch-black, jelly-like object. Yi Xia proudly cast a few incantation gestures that were filled with an evil aura. A green flame emerged out of nowhere, circling around the jelly-like object and burning it for a while. A strange and extremely attractive aroma rose slowly. Smelling this aroma, Wu Qi actually had an uncontrollable desire of hunger. Hunger? Wu Qi paused for a long while. What was Yi Xia doing? Hiding in the clouds, Wu Qi looked down with great interest. Yi Xia clapped her hands proudly. Under the burning of the green flame, the jelly-like object gradually turned colorful and transparent, quivering like a jelly. The jelly was about 7 to 8 miles in diameter. She pouted her little mouth and blew a sharp whistle. Dragon cries rang out one after another. 3,600 little jade dragons, each about 10 feet long, took the lead, followed by 3,600 little golden dragons, 3,600 little silver dragons, 3,600 little white dragons, and 3,600 little black dragons. A total of 18,000 little dragons came whistling over while riding on the gales. The Xiaoyalong in the front was about 10 feet long, while the bigger ones were about 2 feet long, while the smaller ones were only about 1 foot long. Nevertheless, they were all full of spirit power, showing their fangs and brandishing their claws, and releasing a strong dragon aura. These little guys swooped over like a swarm of locusts, nodded excitedly at Yi Xia, then threw themselves onto the huge jelly with drool dripping from their mouths, opened their mouths, and began to devour it. Wu Qi was dumbfounded. If he was not mistaken, these little dragons should be Ao Buzan's children, right? Apart from those Xiaoyalong, how did he produce so many offspring in the past few years? If these little dragons were born to immortal jade bone, how could there be so many species? If they were not born to immortal jade bone, then where did Ao Buzan hook up with so many women in the past 2 years? Slowly drifting down from the clouds, a few alert little dragons discovered Wu Qi at once. They opened their little mouths and let out childish but fierce dragon roars, ready to attack Wu Qi with flames and thunderbolts. Fortunately, Yi Xia discovered them quickly. She scolded them, then threw herself into Wu Qi's arms excitedly and said, "Demon King, you're back? Qixia is preparing rations for these little guys. They eat rotten fish and stinky shrimps all day long, yet they don't grow any taller. It's been so many years, but why are they still like loaches? That old lecher doesn't even care about his children. Look at how thin they are." Wu Qi patted Yi Xia's head and glanced at the little dragons. He could not help but be shocked again. Yi Xia's method was really unimaginable. The rich devil aura in these little dragons had merged with the dragon aura, turning into an aura that was even more powerful and vicious than their original dragon aura. He did not know what Yi Xia had done to them, but these little dragons actually carried a trace of the aura of heavenly ghosts, and their bodies seemed to be able to travel through space at will. Looking at these little dragons in astonishment, Wu Qi asked, "What did you feed them?" Yi Xia tilted her head and was about to tell him about the various ingredients and effects she had fed these little dragons over the years, when a beam of colorful light flew over from the side. In a flash, Princess Zhonglu was already at Wu Qi's side. Holding Princess Zhonglu and Yi Xia in his arms, Wu Qi summoned a cloud and enveloped the three of them. They hugged for a moment and slightly eased the lovesickness after not seeing each other for 10 years. After a moment of silence, Wu Qi looked at Princess Zhonglu and asked in a low voice, "What's the matter? You seem to have something on your mind." Princess Zhonglu nodded and said in a deep voice, "The armies of the 6 states have all been given to you. Grandfather and the other emperors of the 5 states, Wu Qi's expression changed slightly. The armies of the 6 states had all been given to you? What kind of joke was this? It had taken Wu Qi a great deal of effort to train up such a huge and elite army in the East Sea. When the 6 states divided their forces, 6/7 of the East Sea's military strength was given to them. But now, the armies of the 6 states had all been given to you? Wu Qi scanned Panga continent with his divine will. Combined with all the clues he had found, he pondered silently for a while, and soon he had figured out 90% of the cause and effect. Damn it, they are all the reincarnations of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. Why did I happen to run into them? Yingjing, the emperor of Qin, was the reincarnation of Emperor Zhuanxu. Wu Ji, the emperor of Wei, was the reincarnation of Emperor Ku. Chu Ping, the emperor of Chu, was the reincarnation of Fuxi. Tianwen, the emperor of Qi, was the reincarnation of Emperor Yao. Zhao Xing, the emperor of Zhao, was the reincarnation of Suiren. What made Wu Qi speechless was that Yen Dan, the emperor of Yen, was the reincarnation of Emperor Shun. But no matter how Wu Qi looked at it, Yen Dan did not have the demeanor of Emperor Shun. Could you imagine the sacred Emperor Shun hiring assassins to kill people? That was exactly what Yen Dan had done. A few years ago, the 6 sacred emperors suddenly comprehended the various things of their past lives, and their divine abilities had reached an incredible level. At the same time, Wu Qi was crafting the Book of Life and Death and the Soul Hooking Brush in Greathorn's lair, and did not have time to respond. After handing over all the people and armies of the 7 states to Diyu, the 6 sacred emperors came to the East Sea to persuade Princess Zhonglun not to act rashly. Even Yi Xia did not dare to disobey their joint forces, and could only watch as Diyu's power was revived. The return of the sacred emperors to Diyu had boosted the morale of Diyu's people, and the power of the Ling dynasty and the Shizo dynasty had plummeted. Wu Qi frowned and breathed a deep sigh. If all 6 of them are reincarnations of the sacred emperors, then what am I? Chapter 997. On the jade dais in the main hall of the king of East Sea's mansion, Wu Qi sat on the throne with a frown on his face. Princess Zhonglu sat on his left without saying a word. Like Wu Qi, she was expressionless like a wooden statue. Yi Xia sat on Wu Qi's right, twisting and turning like a caterpillar, yawning and making faces from time to time. Gusts of chilly wind blew across the ground in the great hall from time to time. These were all her little tricks. The chilly wind lifted the corner of Huang Liang's battle robe. Like a loyal dog, Huang Liang was staring fixedly at Wu Qi, observing the slightest change in Wu Qi's expression. If Wu Qi gave the order to attack at this moment, Huang Liang would immediately bring the army of the East Sea and tear everyone in that target to pieces. Beside Huang Liang, hundreds of generals trained by the East Sea were also staring at Wu Qi with solemn eyes. These generals were the most loyal to Wu Qi in the entire East Sea. To them, Wu Qi was like a teacher and a father, and it was Wu Qi who had given them the strength and power they had today. The chilly wind lifted Lu Qingfeng's robe at the same time. Lu Qingfeng, who was frowning as well, sighed softly. He was surrounded by many civil officials of the East Sea. These civil officials were the elites in political affairs that the East Sea had cultivated over the years. But, after all, the natives of Pangu continent were simple and honest, and they were not as quick-witted as the civil officials of the 6 states. But now that the forces of the 6 states had all been withdrawn and merged into Diyu, and all the civil and military officials of the 6 states were under Diyu's control, the only thing they could do was to promote these civil officials of the East Sea to many positions in a hurry. Fortunately, Wu Qi had taken precautions and used Dark Yin's celestial tower to accelerate time to train tens of millions of civil officials in the East Sea. So, after the sudden incident of the 6 states, the administrative system of the East Sea was not greatly affected. Batches of new soldiers had also been trained in the underground spirit caves, barely filling the gap in the military power of the East Sea after the 6 states merged into Diyu. But these newly trained soldiers had not gone through any battle, so their overall strength was far inferior to the original army of the East Sea. Fortunately, Yi Xia had trained millions of half-fiend and half-human soldiers for the East Sea with the means of the Fiend League. This army was brutal, and had an amazing fighting capacity. Especially when their souls were controlled by Yi Xia, there was absolutely no problem in their loyalty. After the incident of the 6 states, the Fiend Army of the East Sea took the initiative to attack the territory of the Ling dynasty, slaughtering 3,000 major cities of the Ling dynasty. Only then did they deter the restless Ling dynasty, preventing it from shaking the territory actually controlled by the East Sea. Apart from Lu Qingfeng, who stayed in the East Sea, the only people from the 6 states who remained under Wu Qi were Yan Bugui, Xiangyu, and Hu Hai. Yan Bugui was in charge of the punishment court, the largest intelligence agency in the East Sea, and he lived a good life in the East Sea. In the East Sea, he was the biggest leader of the punishment court. But if he went to Diyu, he could at most be a criminal officer in the punishment court of Diyu. So, Yan Bugui stayed in the East Sea. As for Xiangyu and Hu Hai, Xiangyu had sworn to serve Wu Qi to the death, so he stayed with the Xiang clan. Hu Hai, on the other hand, was a loner. He had a strange character, and did not get along well with the civil and military officials of Daqin, nor was he close to his elder brother, Fu Su. Therefore, he simply stayed in the East Sea and took the initiative to become Xiangyu's deputy. Wu Qi looked at the remaining forces in the Great Hall in the East Sea, then suddenly sighed and said, "How magnificent was the gathering of heroes in this Great Hall that day? Why do I feel so cold today?" Sitting cross-legged on the ground, Ao Buzan suddenly sneezed. He pointed a finger at Xia and cried out, "My lord, if you don't tell this little girl to stop quickly, the cold wind will make everyone feel cold, and we will all fall sick with a fever." Immortal Jadebone and a few other female fiend immortals sat around Ao Buzan, looking at Ao Buzan with a smile on their faces. Immortal Jadebone was subdued by Ao Buzan years ago, and during the 10 years when Wu Qi was concentrating on refining treasures, Ao Buzan had a few more powerful female fiends around him, and his offspring had grown several times stronger. It was not hard to imagine the background of these female fiend immortals. After listening to Ao Buzan's complaint, Wu Qi patted Xia on the head. Xia immediately sat up straight and withdrew the cold wind in the Great Hall. A little annoyed, he rose to his feet and walked down the jade platform. After pacing back and forth in the Great Hall, Wu Qi snorted coldly and said, "These majesties are too outrageous. Even if they are the reincarnations of Saint Emperors, it's fine if they go back to Diyu by themselves, but why do they have to bring so many people back with them? I don't mind those ordinary people, but my East Sea army. Since when did the East Sea become Diyu's training camp?" Huang Liang took 2 steps forward and bowed to Wu Qi. "Your Highness, the soldiers of the East Sea are very loyal to you. At least 99% of them will flee back to the East Sea at your command." Lu Qingfeng added, "But this way, we will have shed all pretense of cordiality with Diyu." Wu Qi gently rubbed his cheeks with both hands and murmured, "This face? TSK, it will happen sooner or later, right?" But now that the 6 of them have returned to Diyu, the details of the East Sea will be known. This is going to be a headache. After carefully pondering for a while, Yen Dan and the other 5 knew quite a lot about the East Sea. Fortunately, they did not know about the underhand sect and the Buddhist dojo that Beiji presided over. Even if they did hear about it, they would not know too much about it. Wu Qi still had some trump cards he could play. But it was still a very uncomfortable thing. Wu Qi felt that Diyu had probably found out the color of his underwear. Just as he was hesitating whether he should follow Huang Liang's suggestion and recall the East Sea soldiers who were absolutely loyal to Wu Qi, a general on duty in the prince's mansion strode into the Great Hall. He cupped his fists at Wu Qi and said, "Your Highness, there is an old woman outside the door who wishes to see you." The general said hesitantly, "The woman is dressed in rags and looks like an ordinary woman. But no matter how hard the guards at the door try to chase her away, they can't do anything to her." Wu Qi was stunned. His divine sense, which had reached the level of Dao fusing, quickly shrouded the front door of the prince's mansion. He did not purposely conceal his aura. When the divine sense of a Dao fusing realm was released, an ordinary person would not be able to detect anything unusual. However, in the eyes of the mighty figures above the Tai realm, it would be a vast expanse of majestic purple gas that quickly shrouded the entire prince's mansion. The faintly discernible suppressive aura made everyone hold their breath, not daring to make a sound. Sitting on the throne, Xia clenched her fists in excitement. She murmured, "The demonic king really did not disappoint Xia. It has only been a few years, but his divine sense has already surpassed Xia's by so much. A few years ago, The demonic king was still being beaten by Xia. But now, Xia is far inferior to him. In front of the king of East Sea's mansion, an old woman about 5 feet tall, dressed in rags and holding a bamboo basket, stood trembling in the middle of the gate. She squinted her eyes and peered into the prince's mansion. Hundreds of guards of the prince's mansion had formed a circle around her. Each of them was baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, but they could not move at all. Clearly, they wanted to drive the woman away, but they were restrained by someone with the restrictive spell. Under the divine sense of ordinary people, this woman was just an ordinary old woman. Even Princess Zhonglu and Yi Xia did not notice anything unusual. But under the divine sense of Wu Qi, he could see that every thread on the old woman's clothes was emitting thousands of rays of light. The lumps of soil on her clothes were actually thumb-sized pearls with all kinds of mystical properties. The old woman was not what she looked like on the outside. She was clearly a noble, graceful, and beautiful young woman. The auspicious purple light swirled around her, and there was a strong sense of kindness and love in her boundless majesty. Wu Qi sucked in a cold breath. Disrespecting Xiang Ao, he said in a deep voice, "Come with me to welcome the honored guest. An old acquaintance of mine is here." Ao Buzan was stroking immortal Jadebone's thigh. When he heard Wu Qi's words, he jumped to his feet and laughed. "Which old acquaintance? Is it that Great Horns?" When Lao Tzu met him for the first time, he almost took Great Horns as a woman and had sex with him. I wonder if he still remembers Lao Tzu? A chill ran down Wu Qi's spine. He gave Ao Buzan a fierce glare, then hurried to the front door with all the civil and military officials of the East Sea in the Great Hall. From a distance, Wu Qi ordered the people to open the front door, then bowed deeply to the woman and said, "My Lady Empress Hua, please forgive me for not going out to meet you." Ao Buzan's eyelids twitched, and a gleam flickered in his eyes. He had used his chaotic Zulong's innate divine ability to see through the old woman's disguise. He cleared his throat and put on the look of a gentleman, then cupped his fist and bowed deeply to the Wahuang clan. "It turns out that the Wahuang clan is here. You've brought a lot of trouble to those bald donkeys and ox noses. How many of their disciples and granddisciples have died in the last 2 years? Lao Tzu has taken advantage of this opportunity to have a good meal." The sound of saliva rolling could be heard as Ao Buzan stuck out his tongue and licked his lips. Beside him, Catfish, Goldhorn, and the other fierce deities were also licking the corners of their mouths, savoring the aftertaste. Wu Qi's face blushed. "What kind of bastards are around me?" He laughed dryly, then turned to the Wahuang clan and said, "My lady, please come into my mansion and serve me some tea. Yuan Ling has the finest spirit tea grown in Yuan Ling's nether realm. I dare not say anything about other vengeful spirits, but when it comes to tea leaves, the little resources of all my old friends combined are not even as good as those produced in Yuan Ling's nether realm." The Wahuang clan smiled faintly. Purple mist rose from her body, and she returned to her original appearance. Almost instinctively, all the soldiers of East Sea dropped to their knees, touched their foreheads to the ground, and bowed deeply to the Wahuang clan. It was an instinctive reverence for the Lady Saint who created their own race in the human bloodline. It was like a lamb kneeling at its mother's breast, or a crow feeding on its mother's breast. It was a natural instinct that could never be erased. "You're too polite, my old friend Yuan Ling," the Wahuang clan chuckled and said, "It has been many years since I last tasted the spirit tea grown in Yuan Ling's nether realm." "You don't have to be so polite, my old friend. I, Nuwa, have come here today because I have something to ask of you." Ao Buzan's eyes went wide as he stared at the Wahuang clan. Being stared at by Ao Buzan's strange gaze, the Wahuang clan glared angrily at Ao Buzan and snapped, "You're a troublemaker, why are you staring at me like that? Back then, if I hadn't protected a wisp of your true spirit with the 10,000 spirit cauldron, allowing you to reincarnate and nurture your soul, how could you return to your original appearance today?" Ao Buzan was taken aback. Hastily, he bowed solemnly to the Wahuang clan and expressed his gratitude. Since the Wahuang clan had said that, it must be true. Back then, when he raped that Chaos Fiend God, he was killed by the Chaos Fiend God, who was so furious and ashamed that he exploded himself. Initially, he thought that his soul should have perished, but now, he was able to return to his original appearance. He felt that he owed the Wahuang clan a great favor. Wu Qi's heart skipped a beat. Ao Buzan was protected by the Wahuang clan? Then, how did he, who was killed by dozens of chaos fiend gods, manage to reincarnate safely? Chapter 998. In the main hall of the King of East Sea, 2 thrones were placed on the left and the right. Wahuang clan sat on the seat of honor, while Wu Qi sat on the seat of honor. Princess Zhonglu and Yi Xia were boiling water and making tea, while Ao Buzan and the others stood respectfully in the hall, without making any sound. Ao Buzan owed Wahuang clan his life. Although he was a bit of a bastard, he valued kindness very much, and that was the reason why he had been serving Wu Qi as his master. Wahuang clan had saved his life, so he naturally had to show respect to her. As for the others, Lu Chengfeng and the others were pure human beings, and they naturally admired and respected Wahuang clan. Immortal Jadebone and the other female immortals under Ao Buzan's control knew about Wahuang clan's background, so they dared not to show any disrespect to her. Holding the translucent jade cup and taking a sip of the fragrant tea, Wahuang clan nodded in satisfaction, smiled, and said, "It's indeed a supreme tea. The few divine teas in Empress Was Palace are far from being comparable to it. Has Yuan Ling, my old friend, taken back Yuan Ling's nether realm?" Wu Qi slowly nodded and said in a deep voice, "Indeed, it has been taken back. Fortunately, no one has broken into Yuan Ling's nest these years. Everything in it is still intact." Wahuang clan smiled and didn't say another word. She tasted the tea with an appreciative smile, and Princess Zhonglu poured her a new cup of tea. After 3 cups of wine, Wu Qi asked, "Back then, in the depths of the chaos, in front of the ancient holy palace, Yuan Ling was attacked by the 7 Buddhist patriarchs, the 9 Tao patriarchs, and over 30 chaos monsters. He thought that he would die for sure, but luckily he escaped into the reincarnation of Pangu world, and survived Yuan Ling. Do you know why?" Putting down the teacup, Wahuang clan nodded and said, "Back then, Saint Pangu had just created the Pangu world. His soul and 90% of his life force transformed into the 10,000 spirit cauldron, which Nuwa found. The 10,000 spirits cauldron was the original spirit treasure of Pangu world. In Pangu world, it had countless magical uses. Nuwa just happened to preserve a trace of my old friend Yuan Ling's true spirit and send it into samsara. You don't need to mention such a trivial matter." Sitting down, Ao Buzan laughed out loud and said, "Hee, Wahuang clan is indeed a Wahuang clan. You don't need to mention the life-saving grace of Lao Tzu." Glaring at Ao Buzan in anger, Wahuang clan continued blandly, "My old friend Yuan Ling doesn't need to owe Nuwa a favor. But you lecherous dragon, back then, Nuwa was soft-hearted and saved you. If I had known that you were still evil, I would have let you fly back to Pangu world. Now, you've been causing trouble everywhere. You should just return the favor to Nuwa." Ao Buzan didn't say another word. He felt that this was unfair. "Why do I have to return the favor?" Putting down the teacup, Wu Qi nodded and said, "Empress Wa, Holy Mother, please be frank. If there's anything that Yuan Ling can do to help, he will certainly help." Wahuang clan remained silent for a while, then stood up, bowed to Wu Qi and said, "In this case, Nuwa will be shameless." Wu Qi stood up and bowed back, then said straightforwardly, "But, Empress Wa, please understand that Yuan Ling's cultivation is limited, and he's not capable enough. If it's just a small favor, just mention it, and you can help as many times as you want. But, if you want Yuan Ling to fight those few old bastards, let's talk about it after Yuan Ling fuses with Dao." Covering her mouth, Wahuang clan laughed and said, "My old friend Yuan Ling used to be so straightforward in the past. How did he become so cunning now?" Shaking her head with a smile, Wahuang clan said in a low voice, "Of course I won't trouble my old friend Yuan Ling too much. But, Yuan Ling, please agree with me. Now that the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs are fighting for the destiny of the human race and trying to use it to help them break through the current shackles, before the fate of the human race is settled, my old friend Yuan Ling, Please don't make things difficult for you. Wu Qi pondered for a long time, then nodded slowly and said, "If they don't make things difficult for me, I won't make things difficult for them." The 6 divine emperors have actually reincarnated countless times in the mortal world. My lady's means are really unpredictable. Hee, those soldiers and horses are a gift from Yuan Ling, but you can't provoke me, or I'll definitely fight back with all my strength. Smiling, Huang Clan nodded and said, "How dare they? After all, my old friend Yuan Ling and Zhuanshu are father and son-in-law. From now on, the East Sea will be independent from Diyu. You can form your own kingdom or sect. In any case, the eastern region of Pangu continent will belong to you from now on." Huang Clan deliberately mentioned the father-in-law and son-in-law. Wu Qi blushed and kept cupping his fist and begging for mercy from Huang Clan. Among the 90,000 women of 6 dynasties, the karmic entanglement between him and Emperor Zhuanshu and the other 5 divine emperors could not be separated. Now that Huang Clan had promised him that he could form his own kingdom in the East Sea, Wu Qi could only accept it, lest he had to tangle with Zhuanshu and the others in the future. After chatting and laughing for a while, Huang Clan suddenly fell silent. Wu Qi shut his mouth as well. He knew that it was time for Huang Clan to pay him a visit. In the eyes of Huang Clan and Wu Qi, 90,000 women and son-in-law were just some trivial matters. Something that could make Huang Clan visit him in person must not be such a trivial matter. After a moment of silence, Huang Clan slowly told him about the agreement she had made with the 18 saints of the Holy Alliance, as well as the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs. Whether it was the fiend gods of the outer heavenly realms or the battles between Diyu, the Ling dynasty, and the Shizo dynasty, the almighty experts of Tao-fusing realm could only watch from the sidelines and give advice, but could not do anything themselves. The chaotic heavenly secrets continued to be chaotic, and to emerge victorious from it, it was up to the disciples of various powers to work hard. Aside from Tao-fusing realm experts, Tao-breaking realm experts were the pinnacle existences. According to what Huang Clan knew, on the 2nd day after the agreement was made, the leaders of the 99 sects of the 33 heavens of Tao League and the first-generation sect leaders of the 100 sects of Buddhism came out in full force. These 199 people were all almighty experts of Tao-breaking realm, and they had countless disciples. For example, the current Lord Buddha of Buddhism, Amitabha, was merely a disciple of the Heart sect, the first sect among the 100 sects of Buddhism. However, Tao-breaking grandmasters could not do anything themselves. Most of the schemes and battles were presided over by the almighty experts of Tai realm, while the Golden Immortals and Heaven Immortals carried out all the strategic planning. It was like a chaotic chess game. The players were already in position, busily deploying troops and arranging chess pieces. In addition to the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors in the history of the human race, who had attained immortal bodies by virtue of immeasurable virtues, the 24 emperors of Great Yu, who were the earliest emperors after the founding of the human race, had left their places of seclusion. The blind old man who taught Wu Qi the true body of heaven and earth scripture was Blind So, one of the 24 emperors. Except for Yao Shun, who joined the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, the other 22 emperors were either cultivating in seclusion or traveling around Pangu continent, looking for loyal and reliable people to pass on all kinds of mystic arts of the human race. They had cultivated an extremely powerful force among the people of Diyu. Now that the 6 states had returned to Diyu, and the 22 emperors had handed over the forces they had cultivated over the years to Diyu, Yu dynasty's reputation had soared, and its overall strength was several times stronger than when Wu Qi first came to Pangu continent. Now, Great Yu had a strong army and numerous experts. Its only shortcoming was that Tao League and Buddhist League had a large number of supreme treasures of primal, chaotic spirit artifacts, innate spirit artifacts, and many other precious treasures, as well as countless powerful acquired treasures. The only thing Diyu could bring out were the supreme towers, which were made with countless materials. But the highest grade of the Supreme Tower was only comparable to an innate spirit artifact. At this point, the Huang clan slowly pulled out some treasures from under his sleeves, which emitted a strong aura of virtue. These were all treasures that Wu Qi was very familiar with. They were the personal treasures of the emperors of the 6 states, including the chariot of 8 horses, which had fallen into Wu Qi's hands from In Zheng's hands, and then left Wu Qi after the Great Change. There were thousands of these artifacts of virtue. The Wahuang clan took out these artifacts of virtue, which had shrunk to the size of a thumb. With a strange smile on her face, she looked at Wu Qi and said a little embarrassedly, "I know this is too difficult for you, but Yuan Ling, my old friend, please refine these artifacts of virtue again. Try to improve their power as much as you can." Wu Qi trembled slightly. Thousands of artifacts of virtue. He pointed at them and asked dryly, "Where did you get so many artifacts of virtue?" The Wahuang clan pursed her lips and smiled. Taoist League and Buddhist League have joined hands to refine the mortal worlds, plundering the virtues from them, she said in a low voice. Niwa has only benefited a little from it. The emperors of Diyu were all sent into the mortal worlds by Niwa after their lifespans came to an end, allowing them to accumulate great virtues. Naturally, these artifacts of virtue were created. Speaking of which, this is all the credit of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs. Wu Qi gave the Wahuang clan a quick glance. She was so skillful in using others to lay eggs. He wondered what the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs would think if they knew the truth. But with so many artifacts of virtue, the last shortcoming of Diyu would no longer exist. As long as Wu Qi could refine these artifacts of virtue a little stronger, those treasures of Taoist League and Buddhist League would definitely suffer greatly when they encountered them. With a wry smile, Wu Qi gave the Wahuang clan a thumbs up, nodded, and praised, "The Holy Mother's plan is flawless. Yuan Ling admires you." The Wahuang clan smiled. She knew that Wu Qi had agreed to her request. She pulled out 2 exquisite house models the size of fists from her sleeve and said with a smile, "The best inventory of the past generations of Diyu, as well as all the materials that Niwa has collected from the chaos during her years of guarding the human realm beyond heaven are here. My old friend Yuan Ling, you can use them at will." Pondering for a short while, the Wahuang clan pulled out a golden longsword from the thousands of artifacts of virtue floating around her, emitting strong energy waves and a bright light. She handed the majestic longsword to Wu Qi and said seriously, "My old friend Yuan Ling, please reforge the Shenyuan sword first. Diyu needs an extremely powerful treasure to stabilize its natural fortune. Don't think about anything else, just improve its power." Wu Qi took over the sword, looked at the Wahuang clan, and said in a deep voice, "From a supreme treasure of virtue to a weapon of killing?" The Wahuang clan nodded cautiously. Looking at the sky outside the hall, she said blandly, "There are too many disciples of Taoist League and Buddhist League, and Pangu world can't bear them all. For the humankind, they have to suffer." Wu Qi flicked the Shenyuan sword with his fingers, making the sword buzz and let out a dragon roar. Then he nodded and said, "In this case, Yuan Ling will take this job." The Wahuang clan slowly stood up and bowed to Wu Qi. Wu Qi bowed back, then the Wahuang clan disappeared. Holding the Shenyuan sword, Wu Qi pondered for a short while, then threw the sword to Xia. "Xia, help me forge the weapon. You, invisible sky devil, use all of your evil tricks this time." Weapons of killing? He, thousands of weapons of killing. She is truly going to kill. Chapter 999. At Wahuang clan's request, Wu Qi went into seclusion once again. With his half-step Dao fusing cultivation base, he could barely accelerate the flow of time in Dark Yin Celestial Tower to 1,000,000 times, but it would take too much energy. But the last thing a cultivator of Scroll of Stealing feared was the consumption of energy. As long as he prepared enough resources in advance, Wu Qi could keep the flow of time 1,000,000 times faster than in the underground spirit cave in East Sea City. All the higher-ups of East Sea had followed Wu Qi into the underground spirit cave to assist Wu Qi in artifact crafting. Although they said they were assisting Wu Qi, in fact, they were just providing some insignificant true flame for Wu Qi to use. Meanwhile, Wu Qi would activate the heaven refining cauldron to refine and purify their true flame, then mix it with his own understanding of the heavenly Tao and give it back to them. This was equivalent to Wu Qi forcibly improving their cultivation base with the method of imbuing them with wisdom. Even the so-called rapid progress paled in comparison to this speed of improvement. As time went by, the overall strength of East Sea gradually grew stronger. During this period, Wu Qi came out a few times, and so did the other higher-ups of East Sea. Each time, they only spent a few days dealing with the affairs of East Sea, and then returned to the underground spirit cave to continue their cultivation. When Wu Qi came out for the first time, he simply issued an edict to the territory of East Sea. The whole East Sea broke away from Diyu and formed a kingdom of its own. The name of the kingdom was Yen Huang, which was exactly the same as the name of the kingdom of the human race in the world in his body. Wu Qi himself did not delve into the name of the kingdom, but when the news that the East Sea had formed a kingdom of Yen Huang spread, the Yellow Emperor Xinyuan and the Yen Emperor Shenong were stunned for a long time. They had counted on their fingers many times, but they could not figure out why Wu Qi would name his kingdom like this. Only Huang clan smiled. The fact that Wu Qi named his kingdom Yen Huang meant that the kingdom's destiny was connected to the Yellow Emperor and the Yen Emperor. If Diyu was defeated in the future, Diyu's destiny would be inherited by Yen Huang Kingdom, and the destiny of the human race would not be taken by Tao League or Buddhist League. Conversely, if Yen Huang Kingdom was destroyed by the Ling dynasty or the Shizo dynasty, it would still belong to the human race, and no outsiders would benefit from it. When Yen Huang was founded, its political structure was exactly the same as Great Yu's. Wu Qi was a lazy man, and he did not want to change the social structure or political system. That kind of laborious work was not suitable for him. Great Yu's system had been running for countless eons without any major problems, which proved that it was a pretty good system. Wu Qi had only increased the conscription rate of Yen Huang Kingdom, recruited new soldiers in preparation for the war, and did not take any other special measures. That was all he had done on the surface, but secretly, Wu Qi had been constantly transferring the troops of Yen Huang Kingdom from his inner world to Pangu continent. In just 1 year, Wu Qi had come out of the spirit cave 3 times, and each time, he had transferred a large number of troops from his inner world, which were stationed around the East Sea by Huang Liang. In just these 3 times, Wu Qi had deployed an army equivalent to 2 armies of the East Sea. During this 1 year, the situation on Pangu continent was so turbulent that even the most ordinary mortals could sense that something was wrong. First of all, Wanling City, the capital of the Ling dynasty, avoided the East Sea and moved from the eastern border of Diyu to the south. Kamheart City, the capital of the Shizo dynasty, was also moved to the south. The capitals of the 2 dynasties faced each other from a distance, staring at the southern territory of Diyu like 2 fierce tigers, ready to pounce. Meanwhile, Great Wu, supported by Wu Qi, had shrunk its defense line again and again, putting on a weak and powerless appearance. Diyu began to deploy a large number of troops on the southern border. With the huge army trained by Wu Qi, Diyu had a lot more room to mobilize. In the past, a small military town might only be garrisoned by 100 men, but now, even the smallest military town was garrisoned by thousands of soldiers. For a time, Diyu's military strength was so strong that the Ling dynasty and the Shizo dynasty dared not to act rashly. But Diyu's southern territory was in a state of panic, with several powers flaunting their military strength all day long. The sound of a single drum made of dragon skin could travel tens of thousands of miles, and if tens of thousands of such drums were beaten at the same time, the sound of a mighty army could travel tens of millions of miles away, shattering mountains and rocks like a thunderclap. War drums rumbled and hooves pounded. There were very few ordinary people in Diyu's southern territory, as most of them had been moved to the north by Diyu. Emperor Haozuan personally presided over Dingnan City, an important city in the southern territory, putting on a posture of confrontation with the Ling dynasty and the Shizo dynasty. The stances of the 3 powers were extremely tough, and Great Wu was like a rabbit in front of 3 tigers. Because of the confrontation, Great Wu had a chance to catch its breath and develop. Giguzi and Mod did not return to Diyu with the people of the 6 states. They had promised Wu Qi to support Great Wu, and they had done their best for Great Wu. With their help, Great Wu did not seem to be a match for any of the powers, but if Diyu attacked them in a hurry, they might be badly wounded. In the past year, all the powers had been training their armies and preparing for the war. Although there was no real war yet, all kinds of rumors and prophecies had spread all over the world. For example, they said that Emperor Haozuan was tyrannical and killed his courtiers. For example, they said that Zhang Tingyun was dissolute and raped his own sister. For example, they said that Emperor Wugo was shameless and immoral and held open meetings in public every day. All kinds of bizarre and jaw-dropping rumors were flying everywhere. Even the people at the bottom of the social ladder would discuss the affairs of their emperors and the emperors of other dynasties during their meals. The vivid details were enough to make Emperor Haozuan and the others vomit blood. Even Wu Tianming, the most honest and dutiful of them all, was hit by the arrows. He was living a peaceful life in Great Wu, but some power had made the first move. Rumors that Wu Tianming was a mentally retarded son of a close relative and was not qualified to preside over a kingdom had spread throughout Great Wu with the wind. The rumors were so fierce that Wu Tianming's father, the emperor, had given birth to Wu Tianming after drinking too much and having an affair with his niece. Every position, every posture, and every movement of his father were described in great detail. As for whether Wu Tianming's father had this niece or not, who would care? Wu Tianming, fuming with rage, immediately sent out countless spies of Great Wu to spread the colorful rumors cooked up by the court scholars to the other three dynasties. In these heartbreaking articles, the reason why the Ling dynasty and the Shizhou dynasty suddenly dispatched troops to Diyu was known to all the people of the three dynasties. Zhang Tingyun and Emperor Wugo had fallen in love with Emperor Haozuan at the same time, and they had sent out a huge army to break into Dingnan city and snatch their beloved Emperor Haozuan back to their country. It was said that Zhang Tingyun had not been intimate with his concubines and palace maids for years because of Emperor Haozuan, and the reason why Emperor Wugo had held an open meeting was that Emperor Haozuan had rejected his proposal. That had dealt the emperor a heavy blow, and that was why he had done such an outrageous thing. Because of the emotional entanglement between Zhang Tingyun, Emperor Wugo, and Emperor Haozuan, none of them was fit to be the human emperor. Emperor Haozuan, as the current human emperor of Diyu, had shown his face in public to flirt with women. This was simply ruining the human wheel. How could he be qualified to rule Diyu? Emperor Haozuan, Zhang Tingyun, and Emperor Wugo were so angry that they almost coughed up blood. It did not take long for a new round of rumors cooked up by the Ling dynasty and the Shizhou dynasty to spread across Pangu continent like a plague. In the new rumors, Wu Tianming had become the illegitimate son of Emperor Haozuan and an important minister of Diyu. As for how Emperor Haozuan had fathered Wu Tianming with an important minister of Diyu, who was also a man, such a technical question was not within the scope of the rumors. Amidst the wave of rumors, Diyu had suffered a great loss. It was fine to have the generals of Diyu, who were all muscles for brains, draw their blades and hack people, and the oracles of Diyu, whose blood was replaced by ghost energy, curse and kill people. But it was too difficult for the civil and military officials of Diyu to rack their brains to come up with all kinds of rumors to fight back. Fortunately, Diyu had the civil and military officials of the 6 states who had submitted to it. Emperor Haozuan, who was so angry by the rumors, promoted the civil and military officials of the 6 states to be the chief officials of the newly established imperial palace of Diyu, who were responsible for all the official affairs related to Diyu's literary talent. Zhang Yi, Su Qin, Lin Xiangru, and other glib-tongued civil and military officials swarmed forward, spreading rumors and prophecies like a storm. The deadly rumors swept across the entire Pangu continent through the teleportation formations constructed by the officials of Diyu. It was said that when the rumors cooked up by Su Qin, Zhang Yi, and Lin Xiangru came out, even Emperor Wugo, whose state of mind had reached the state of being as calm as a dry well, was so angry that he coughed up blood and smashed a palace to pieces. Amidst the endless attack of rumors, the monarchs of Diyu, the Ling dynasty, the Shizhou dynasty, and Great Wu plummeted in reputation. In the eyes of outsiders, these 4 rascals had become a bunch of bastards who were worse than dog shit. How could they be qualified to be the human emperor? As the saying goes, kill 1,000, lose 800. In this wave of rumors, all 4 states suffered serious losses, and none of them emerged victorious. The enmity between the four states continued to ferment amidst such rumors. Middle-scale conflicts began to break out on the borders, and the number of casualties soared from thousands to tens of thousands every day. Everyone knew that a great war was imminent. Whether it was the Tao League or the Buddhist League, they could not tolerate the situation to continue like this. All they needed was a fuse to detonate the entire southern region. But no one was willing to be the fuse, because the current situation in the southern region had attracted the attention of all the almighty experts of the realm of Tao fusing. Even the fiend gods who were wreaking havoc in the outer heavenly realms did not attract such attention. Anyone who triggered the war was likely to be schemed against and retaliated by the almighty experts of the realm of Tao fusing. So, who dared to take the lead? But there was a kind of people in the world who were not afraid of death. In the midst of everyone's anticipation, a fuse that no one had expected appeared. Burping and humming a little tune, Aobuzan rode a dark cloud and sneaked into the southern region. Goddess Nuwa, the Yellow Emperor, the Flame Emperor, the 7 Buddhas, the 9 Taoists, and the 18 Saints, the supreme beings of the Pangu world, all focused their attention on Aobuzan at the same time. Aobuzan, who rode a dark cloud all the way, shivered all the way. He grumbled and grumbled, not knowing where that inexplicable feeling in his heart came from. After carefully searching for a long time, he still could not find the source of that feeling. Aobuzan could only blame it on the fact that he had spent too much time with immortal Jadebone last night and had damaged his vital energy. 9 times a night is enough from now on. 18 times is really too much for the body. Sneezing, Aobuzan sneaked all the way south. Chapter 1000. A year had passed in the outside world, but 1,000,000 years had passed in the spirit cave under the East Sea City. It was unclear whether it was at the behest of the Wahuang clan, or because Di was trying to appease Wu Qi, but the amount of natural energy flowing into the spirit cave through the spatial tunnel had increased by more than 100 times. As a result, the concentration and quantity of natural energy in the spirit cave under the East Sea City were much higher than before, almost reaching the level of the spirit cave in Yuxiong Plain. After 1,000,000 years of squandering endless natural energy, coupled with the fact that Wu Qi did not hesitate to consume his own energy essence to improve his cultivation base through the enlightenment technique, Aobuzan had gained a great deal of benefits. In particular, Wu Qi had used the heaven refining cauldron to help him refine his natal true flame, all of which had greatly benefited Aobuzan. As he was Arko Zulong in his previous life, his cultivation base and magic power were both extremely formidable. In this life, he was merely following the path of his previous life. Aobuzan's cultivation speed was much faster than that of others, and coupled with the fact that Wu Qi had given him special treatment, Aobuzan had broken through the realm of 9th tier primordial in just 1,000,000 years and reached the 6th tier of Tao breaking. In his previous life, when Aobuzan was blown into ashes, he should have the overall strength of a 1st tier Tao breaking expert. Now that he had finally returned to the 6th tier Tao breaking realm, he was emboldened, and the unscrupulous style of his previous life had returned. Without telling Wu Qi, Aobuzan sneaked out of the East Sea and sped toward the southern region on a dark cloud. As he flew on the cloud, he sang in a low voice a little tune he had made up himself, such as wherever the spear passes, no one can stop it, blood washes the silver spear, and so on. The Tao fusing experts who were watching Aobuzan from strange spaces such as the heavens beyond heavens and the Daluocean were furious. If it were not for their oaths, perhaps no less than 3 Tao fusing experts would have slapped him to death. At the very least, Yao Ling, Zhu Qing, and Lu Nyang would definitely make a move. Humming a little tune, Aobuzan strolled happily to the outside of Wanling city of Ling dynasty. When he was still hundreds of miles away from the city, Aobuzan retracted his mist and put on an inconspicuous Taoist robe, then swaggered into the city. Watching the notorious scourge of the chaos demon gods sneak into the city of Wanling, the hearts of the 9 Daozu in the Daluocean city twitched. What was this guy going to do? There was a kind of magical existence that was the kind that would bring disaster wherever it went. There was no doubt that Aobuzan was such a character. As soon as he entered the city of Wanling, he ran into a legendary scene. The favorite son of an important minister of Ling dynasty was galloping wildly on a horse, leading a large group of guards and parading through the streets. Ao Buzan had never known how to give way to others. He stood in the middle of the street in a daze. When the young man charged at him while cursing, Ao Buzan gave him a slap on the face and smashed his head. Grabbing the neck of the gold immortal, Ao Buzan sniffed him, ripped off his clothes, opened his mouth, and shoved him into his mouth. As he chewed the unlucky fellow's bones, a copious amount of golden immortal blood sprayed out of the corner of Ao Buzan's mouth. Looking vaguely at the guards, who were stunned with fear, he said, "Lao Tzu wanted to keep a low profile. Do you know what it means to keep a low profile? But why did you force Lao Tzu to keep a high profile? Tell me, what are you forcing me to do? Why are you forcing me to do this?" After swallowing the young man in a few bites, a loud siren suddenly echoed out from Wanling City. Countless layers of defensive spells emerged from the surrounding palaces and mansions, connecting into a large area. 100 miles thick, 1,080 layers of defensive formations tightly wrapped the city up. Ao Buzan yawned and looked curiously at the soldiers of Ling dynasty who were rushing in from all directions. At least 100,000 soldiers of Ling dynasty had surrounded the city, and among them, 20,000 soldiers of Ling dynasty were riding flood dragons of various colors. The most elite group of soldiers rode on heavenly dragons whose cultivation base had reached the realm of heaven immortal, while the rest of them rode on flood dragons, which were subspecies of all kinds of strange and bizarre creatures. A strong dragon aura filled the void, as tens of thousands of bows and crossbows were aimed at Ao Buzan. Vaguely, there were immortals hiding in the clouds around him, controlling Ao Buzan remotely with the aura of flying swords and magical treasures. Up in the sky, many military officers were scolding at Ao Buzan, demanding him to suppress his energy, squat down on the ground, and surrender. Laughing strangely, Ao Buzan glanced at the mounts of the soldiers, then unsteadily took off all his clothes. As a dark mist rose slowly from under his feet, he snapped, "You bastards! You are a disgrace to Lao Tzu by being the mounts of these bastards." As the dark mist rose, Ao Buzan revealed his true form as Zhu Long. His body was pitch black, and he had 9 feet under his abdomen, each with 9 claws. His ferocious and bizarre appearance was completely different from the dragons people were familiar with. Ao Buzan threw his head back and gave a long roar. With a gentle flick of his long tail, dozens of immortals of Ling dynasty who were hiding in the void were whipped out, howling miserably. Ao Buzan's strike was so powerful that the immortals were ripped to pieces and exploded in midair, turning into dozens of clouds of blood mist that looked very dazzling to the eyes. At the same time, the heavenly dragons and flood dragons ridden by the Ling dynasty soldiers let out a shrill roar. They twisted their bodies frantically and threw the soldiers of Ling dynasty far away. Wherever Ao Buzan's dark dragon energy passed, all the heavenly dragons and flood dragons retracted their claws, lay down respectfully on the watery clouds, and kept nodding and worshipping Xiang Ao with great respect. The long roars of countless dragons rang out from all directions of Wanling City. Summoned by Ao Buzan's dragon energy, one flood dragon after another soared into the sky and flew quickly towards Xiang Ao. Those inferior dragons still had the appearance of snakes and flood dragons, but their offsprings, who had cultivated to the realm of heaven and gold immortals, had transformed into human forms and were rushing over feverishly. The generals of Ling dynasty wanted to stop these dragons, but their attempts immediately provoked a violent counterattack from the dragons. A general of Ling dynasty, whose cultivation base had reached the peak of the second Panga heaven, had just drawn his sword when the true dragon he was riding, who was also a peak-level gold immortal, suddenly turned its head, opened its mouth, and let out a deafening roar. The general, who had no time to defend himself, had blood gushing out of his 7 orifices, and his brain was shaken by the roar. There were more than 500,000 dragons in Wanling City, and behind the city was a vast ocean where all the dragons sent by the celestial court to Wanling City were stationed. There were even 18 elders of the dragons here, and the 4 elders with the highest cultivation base were third-tier primordial immortals. But when they sensed the Zhu Long aura emanating from Ao Buzan, and heard the dragon roars that Ao Buzan let out that rang out directly from the depths of the souls of the dragons, the 18 elders of the dragons came whistling over with all their people. The members of the dragon clan who were closest to Ao Buzan had transformed into their human forms and were kneeling on the cloud, while the rest of them were summoning the cloud, their long bodies flying back and forth in it, letting out loud cries of excitement from time to time. Venting his dragon aura to his heart's content, Ao Buzan threw his head back and cried out, "My sons, follow Lao Tzu and stop working for these sons of bitches. He in the future will be the ones riding them. Whoever dares to use Lao Tzu's descendants as mounts will be castrated by Lao Tzu." Dragons valued lineage and social class the most. Influenced by Ao Buzan's Zhu Long aura, all the members of the dragons around Wanling City roared with joy. Ao Buzan transformed into a human form and flew in front of them on a cloud, while hundreds of thousands of dragons of the Ling dynasty roared and followed Ao Buzan toward the west. After flying for a short distance, Ao Buzan suddenly turned around and ran to the outskirts of Wanling City. "From now on a dragon, will not be your mount anymore. Those of you who have gained sentience and are willing to come with me, let's move now," he cried out. Lao Tzu will go to the East Sea and find you a good place for you to live and multiply. Why do you want to be ridden by someone else? After a moment of silence, all the creatures in Wanling City burst into a riot. Phoenixes, cyan phoenixes, turtles, crocodiles, white tigers, green deer, and all the other intelligent mounts flew into the sky. Except for a few who had developed feelings for their masters, 90% of the intelligent mounts in Wanling City transformed into human forms and left with Ao Buzan. An exasperated roar echoed out of Wanling Palace. Zhang Tingyun chased after Ao Buzan with a group of civil and military officials of the Ling dynasty. But Ao Buzan unleashed his Tao-breaking aura unscrupulously, and the terrible spiritual pressure severely wounded 80% of the civil and military officials of the Ling dynasty on the spot. Amidst Ao Buzan's wild laughter, the mighty army of Ling dynasty galloped toward the west. Outside Calming Heart City of the Shizhou dynasty, Ao Buzan played the same trick. A strong dragon aura swept out in all directions. All the dragons of the Buddhist celestial 8 divisions in Calming Heart City flew up into the sky and knelt respectfully to Xiang Ao. After that, they left Calming Heart City proudly. A strong dragon aura spread out in all directions from Pangu continent. The dragons of the 33 heavens, the dragons in Mount Gridrakuta, and the dragons who were the mounts in the immortal mansions in the universe sensed it as well. Led by some elders of the dragons with formidable cultivation bases, the dragons scattered across Pangu world set out for Pangu continent. All the dragons in Diyu had fled in one day, and all the dragons headed straight for the East Sea at Ao Buzan's call. More than 30% of the elite army of Diyu had lost their mounts, and their combat effectiveness had been reduced by at least half. Because of Ao Buzan's sudden appearance, the dragons immediately gathered into a solid fist. When those Tao-fusing experts carefully examined the situation of the dragons for the first time, they were surprised to find that there were Tao-breaking experts among the dragons, and many of them were primordial experts. A large number of dragons served as important ministers in various departments of the celestial court, and a department of the Buddhist celestial 8 divisions was directly composed of members of the dragons. Now that these dragons had joined Ao Buzan, the perverted dragon suddenly had a formidable army under his command. More than 30 great elders of the Tao-breaking realm, more than 1,000 dragons of the primordial realm, countless divine and true dragons of the gold immortal and heaven immortal realms, and they practiced the body-tempering techniques of the Buddhist League, Tao League, and the dragons. The number of this army was astonishing, and their combat effectiveness was even more unsettling. For the first time, the almighty experts of Pangu world realized how powerful the unified dragons were. This did not include the various subspecies of dragons derived from the dragons. The males of the dragons had more or less inherited some of the qualities of Ao Buzan. They had all worked hard to spread the seeds of the dragons everywhere. Therefore, the number of subspecies of the dragons was extremely large, more than 1,000 times that of the pure-blooded dragons. A terrifying number of 1,000 times. All the waters and wetlands near the East Sea were immediately filled with dragons and flood dragons. 3 days after Aobuzon's trip to the southern region, the Ling dynasty and the Shizo dynasty launched an all-out attack on Diyu at the same time. Chapter 1001. In the southeastern territory of Diyu, a magnificent city was in sight between two mountains. In front of the city was a piece of flat land that measured hundreds of miles in circumference, large enough to accommodate an army of 1,000,000 soldiers. Dense tents occupied the open space, and soldiers carrying the banner of Ling dynasty were drilling around the barracks like ants. The faint sound of drums and horns could be heard. On the wall between the two mountains, which was about a mile high, a few generals of Diyu were standing with their arms crossed over their chests, looking coldly at the busy enemy dozens of miles away. All the restrictive spells inside and outside the city had been activated, and the restrictive spell that stretched for tens of thousands of miles had turned the place into a forbidden zone for all flying creatures. From time to time, some unlucky birds would stray into this airspace, and then fall to the ground like stones. There was not a single civilian in the city. A total of 300,000 soldiers were stationed in the city, and they were commanded by a general whose cultivation base had already stepped into Hongmeng Panga heaven. It was he who was watching the enemy of Ling dynasty from the top of the wall with a few deputies. This general, Gongsun Meng, was born in an aristocratic clan in Liangzhu, and had been a general for generations. The hundreds of cities southeast of Diyu were basically the traditional territories of his clan. Looking at the busy enemy, Gongsun Meng spat out of the city. He chuckled and said in a low voice, "News from the imperial court." Hearing Gongsun Meng's words, his deputies hurriedly assumed a posture of listening attentively. Gongsun Meng nodded with satisfaction, then slowly told them the information he had received from Gongsun clan. After Aobuzon's messing around, all the dragons, divine beasts and immortal beasts of various powers had returned to East Sea. The strength revealed by the dragons and the huge dragons had frightened all the powers. All of a sudden, the East Sea had become an influential power on Pangu continent, and no one knew what other trump cards the East Sea had. The Ling dynasty and the Shizo dynasty thought that Aobuzon's actions were inspired by Wu Qi. After some deliberation, they launched an all-out attack on Diyu. They were all afraid that the East Sea would attack them after they completely absorbed the dragons. Before the worst situation came, they had to conquer Diyu as soon as possible and complete the deification plan that the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs had been planning for many years. Therefore, this all-out attack by the Ling dynasty and the Shizo dynasty was forced by Aobuzon. Gongsun Meng laughed and said, "However, what is the background of that fellow named Aobuzon? Even the elders of my Gongsun clan couldn't get any information about him. His background must be very strange. But this is also good. These bastards have finally come. We can teach them a good lesson." Rubbing his fists, Gongsun Meng cracked his knuckles. He could not wait to fight the army of the Ling dynasty and make enough contributions in the war so that he could be conferred the title of Marquis or even King. This was the dream of Gongsun Meng and all the soldiers of Diyu. The earth was shaking slowly. Gongsun Meng and the others raised their heads and looked into the distance in astonishment. Right behind the army camp of the Ling dynasty, dozens of heaven immortals were using immortal spells to split open the mountains and the earth, gradually drawing over a river that was tens of miles wide. The earth cracked open, and the white river surged all the way to the city wall with the sound of crashing waves. Gongsun Meng's face darkened slightly, and he immediately gave the order to prepare for battle. Nearly 10,000 soldiers quickly climbed up the wall, carrying out a great number of lethal weapons, such as bows and crossbows, from the armory inside the wall. Quietly, hundreds of oracles stood behind these soldiers, their hands flashing with bright lights as they cast various defensive spells on the soldiers. Gongsun Meng was so excited that his body was twitching. Here they are, finally here they are. The army of the Ling dynasty had been confronting Diyu in the southern region for more than a year, and now they were finally here. White heads, bloody corpses, and battle credits flew all over the sky. Gong Sun Meng took a deep breath and slowly exhaled a scorching hot breath. When they were about 10 miles away from the city, the Heaven Immortals stopped. They were busy working on the same spot, casting all kinds of immortal spells. Gradually, a great lake, about 100 miles in circumference, appeared in front of the city. The white water was rippling, and some strange-looking fishes with lumps on their heads slowly poked their heads out of the water. What are they doing? Doesn't this lake, which is about 100 miles in circumference, block our attack route? Gong Sun Meng looked at these Heaven Immortals in confusion. What are they playing at? The lake alone has taken up almost all the open space in front of the city wall where the army can be deployed. How can the soldiers of the Ling dynasty launch an attack? And what are those fishes in the lake? Why do I have a bad feeling about them? Before Gong Sun Meng could come up with a solution, tens of thousands of these strange fishes suddenly poked their heads out from under the white water. Their mouths, about 10 feet in circumference, were aimed at the city wall. The surrounding water was shaking violently, and a series of loud popping noises could be heard as countless streams of white water shot out from the mouths of these fishes and smashed onto the city wall. A series of collisions rang out, and the city wall trembled violently. A blinding light burst out from the restrictive runes on the city wall, and a black screen of light, several miles in width, about a mile in height and 10 feet in thickness, appeared outside the city wall. The white water streams smashed onto the black screen, causing it to shake violently, even though it was so thick that it could withstand a full-force strike from a gold immortal. These water streams had an astonishing penetrating power, and each of their strikes almost pierced through the screen. The city wall was shaking, causing Gong Sun Meng and the others to sway and lose their footing. What is this strange thing? What are they shooting out? He cried out in shock. The white water streams smashed and shattered on the black screen. Loud noises rang out as a great amount of water poured down, forming a waterfall that was several miles wide on the city wall. These white water streams were formed by the extremely compressed water of the lake by those huge fishes, which made them hundreds of times denser than steel. Coupled with the incredible speed at which they shot out these water streams were extremely lethal. In just a few breaths of time, at least tens of millions of water streams had smashed onto the defensive mechanism. The black screen of light grew thinner and thinner, and suddenly, the sound of energy stones cracking could be heard coming from inside the city wall. A few defensive mechanisms were destroyed by the tremendous impact, while the restrictive formations deployed inside the city wall collapsed and a large area of the light screen suddenly exploded. The dense white water streams swept across the city wall like a storm. However, the soldiers of Diyu who were hit by these water streams were smashed to pieces like eggs smashed by a hammer. The water streams pierced through the air and produced deafening rumbling noises. In just a blink of an eye, several thousand soldiers had their bodies smashed and died. Gong Sun Meng flew into a rage. Oracles, come forward and stop these damn things. Quickly repair the defensive mechanisms on the city wall, and activate the second defensive formation. On top of the city wall, Gong Sun Meng was very busy. Meanwhile, on a small hill in the military camp of Ling Dynasty, a few generals of the Ling Dynasty were narrowing their eyes and looking in this direction. The leader of these generals of the Ling Dynasty was none other than the trusted general of Liu Bang, Han Exing. With a gloomy face, Han Exing gently stroked his chin, nodded satisfyingly and said, "These shooting sun demon carps sent by those bald donkeys are indeed powerful. They are truly a powerful weapon when used to attack a city. TSK, what a pity. How come only 6 of the Spirit Vulture Mountains have been breached, and only a few shooting sun demon carps are left?" The nearby generals of the Ling Dynasty agreed with Han Exing respectfully, accusing the disciples of the Buddhist League for being too useless and nearly having their lair completely destroyed. These shooting sun demon carps were demons secretly bred by the Buddhist League, specifically to be used by the Shizo dynasty to attack the cities of Diyu. Unfortunately, 6 of the Spirit Vulture Mountains had been breached, and many of the lakes used to breed the demon carps had been breached by the fiends celestial from the outer domains. The demon carps in the lakes were all eaten up, and only the Thunder Note Mountains were left with hundreds of thousands of demon carps. In order to attack Diyu, the Buddhist League had generously given half of the demon carps to the Ling dynasty. These demon carps were specially bred by the Buddhist League to be used in attacking cities. Now, they had only used 30% of their strength, yet they were able to defeat the city that was guarded by Gongsun Meng. It was obvious how powerful they were. The water beams shot out by these demon carps were not only formed by the compression of a huge amount of water, but they also contained various restrictive spells. In fact, they were a type of divine attack. Furthermore, the frequency of their attacks was extremely fast. With every snap of their fingers, they could shoot out thousands of water beams. Not even gold immortals could release immortal spells at such a high speed, let alone ordinary siege weapons. Apart from the fact that they had to be used in places with water sources, and that they had to be specially created for them, these shooting sun demon carps were truly top-notch siege weapons. Within a short quarter of an hour, 37 layers of defensive mechanisms of the city guarded by Gongsun Meng were broken in a row. Thousands of streams of watery light smashed directly onto the city wall, leaving thousands of holes on the 1-mile-thick city wall and shattering all the defensive mechanisms inside the city wall. Many of the armory built inside the city wall were destroyed as well, and over 3,000 of the tens of thousands of soldiers who were resting in the caves and preparing for their shifts were killed. The heavy loss nearly drove Gongsun Meng mad. Accompanied by a deep, muffled whistling noise, countless water beams shot out in all directions, and the city wall trembled under the tremendous impact. Suddenly, a loud boom rang out, and a section of the city wall, about 1 mile wide, suddenly crumbled. However, the army of Ling dynasty did not seize the opportunity to attack. Instead, they just laughed aloud as they watched the demon carps in the lake spew out water beams crazily, smashing the city wall into pieces. On a tall mountain behind the city, Baichi was sitting on top of an ordinary white horse, looking gloomily at the destroyed city wall. Fools! At this stage, if we don't go out of the city and kill those big fishes, what's the point of guarding the city wall? Baichi laughed contemptuously, shook his head and said, "Are you sure that the army of Ling dynasty in front of us is under the command of that little Han Exe?" A few Diyu generals standing around Baichi bowed and answered, "Your Highness, it is indeed the army of Ling dynasty under the command of Han Exin." Baichi grinned, nodded slowly and said, "Good, I heard that this little Han Exin is a very good commander of the army. It is not in vain that I snatched this opportunity to fight with him. Hehe, let Wang Jian, Li Xian, and the others enjoy the wind, while Han Exin, this fat piece of meat, is mine. I have to think of a good way to deal with him." Then, he clamped his legs together and sat on the white horse. Unable to withstand the great strength of Baichi's legs, the white horse was snapped into two by Baichi. Blood and internal organs sprayed out in all directions, dyeing Baichi's clothes red. Falling to the ground in a sorry state, Baichi stared blankly at the white horse that was twitching and howling miserably. Suddenly, he pointed his finger at the sky and cursed in exasperation. "Bastard Ao Buzan! How could you abduct all the intelligent mounts of Diyu? How are we supposed to march and fight a war like this?" When he thought of the few divine mounts he once owned, Baichi was so angry that he nearly coughed out blood. The anger in his belly turned into a boundless killing intent. Cried Baichi in a deep voice, "We will take a detour from both flanks and march straight to the main camp of Ling dynasty." Clenching his fists tightly, Baichi stared at the camp of Ling dynasty in the distance and said fiercely, "Han Exin, you are dead meat." Chapter 1002. In the underground spirit cave of the East Sea City, the heaven-refining cauldron floated above Wu Qi's head. Wisps of flames were constantly melting various rare materials, turning them into colorful solutions. Under the control of Wu Qi's powerful divine sense, these melted rare materials were twisted into various complex runes and constantly imprinted into thousands of weapons of merit. In the middle, a Xianyuan sword floated. Its original majestic aura was still there, and a despair-inducing sharpness was bursting out from the blade, stimulating the heaven-refining cauldron to make muffled buzzing sounds. Thousands of senior civil officials of the East Sea, including Lu Chengfeng, and countless immortals of the East Sea, sat around Wu Qi and spewed out their natal true fires. After being refined and purified by the heaven-refining cauldron, Wu Qi added his own understanding of the heavenly Tao to them. Around these immortals were dragons in human form and other divine beasts and immortal birds. Ao Buzan unified the Zhou Tian dragons and abducted countless beasts that were forced to become mounts. Regarding Ao Buzan's behavior, Wu Qi did not express any opinion on the surface, but he was very happy in his heart. He specially cultivated the dragons and these beasts, striving to produce a large number of high-level dragons, divine beasts, and immortal birds in a short period of time. Whether it was dragons or other beasts, they all had their own innate abilities, and their cultivation speed was much faster than that of humans. Under Wu Qi's deliberate promotion, in just a short period of tens of thousands of years, more than a dozen elders of the dragons broke through to the Tao-breaking realm, and nearly 1,000 other elders broke through to the Tao-reasoning realm. The overall strength of the dragons had almost doubled. Other beasts also broke through one after another. Under the leadership of Ao Buzan, the best of these divine beasts and immortal birds were paired with the dragons, further complicating the bloodline of the dragons and greatly enhancing the combat power of the dragons. Regardless of whether they were married to a handsome dragon or a beautiful dragon girl, they were all on the same boat of the dragon race. They were tightly tied to the war chariot that was the Yan Huang country. The transformation of an artifact of virtue was extremely complicated. Increasing their power without damaging the aura of virtue was a job that required great care and attention. Even with Wu Qi's artifact refinement technique, it had taken him nearly 1,000,000 years to transform the thousands of artifacts of virtue into their final forms, and he was only one step away from the final stage of nourishing them. Suddenly, Wu Qi, who had been covering the entire Pangu continent with a wisp of divine sense, was stunned. He performed a few incantation gestures and threw them into the heaven-refining cauldron. The Yuan Ling True Flame burst out and enveloped the items of merit. He chuckled and said, "There's going to be a show, Huang Liang of Qi, Huang Huang, and the items of the Huang sect Emperor realm." Then he pulled out the Book of Life and Death and drew a line in the air. A screen of light shot down, revealing two armies marching through the mountains. Like two large pincers of a crab, the two armies, one on the left and the other on the right, were clawing at the camp of the Ling dynasty, which was located on a flat land surrounded by mountains. Each army had hundreds of thousands of men and horses, and each of them had a strong cultivation base. They could cross mountains and rivers as if they were walking on flat land, moving extremely fast in the mountains. The armors worn by the two armies were very different from the standard armors of Diyu. The half-body armors only covered the vital parts of the upper body, giving off a fierce air. Many soldiers did not even bother to put on the armors, but just clenched their jaws and marched forward with their weapons in hand. Look carefully, they are wearing only half-body armors or no armors at all. These are the characteristics of the Daqin warriors. It looks like the 6 states have returned to you, but they still haven't given up on the things buried deep in their bones, Wu Qi said coolly. Huang Liang, learn from them how they arrange their armies and formations. The tactics of Diyu are outdated in front of them for God knows how many years. If you lead an army to fight against them, you won't even know how you died. The generals of Diyu army were all simple-minded. They were best at relying on their overwhelming strength and superior numbers to fight and charge. The formations they were best at were the most traditional square and circular formations. In the face of famed generals like Bai Qi and Han Exin, such a rigid and inflexible strategy was simply suicidal. Therefore, Wu Qi took some time out of his busy schedule to show the head-on clash between Bai Qi and Han Exin, so that Huang Liang and the other generals of the East Sea could learn what a real war was. If it was Huang Liang who was in charge of the Great Yu army, he would definitely choose to charge out from the city and clash with the enemy head-on. That way, he would be bombarded by tens of thousands of demonic shooting sun carps, and it was unknown how many soldiers he would lose before he could reach the Ling dynasty's camp. As for Bai Qi, he simply ordered his soldiers to make a detour from the mountains on both sides and launch an attack. Relying on the powerful cultivation base of his soldiers, he would definitely be able to disperse the Ling dynasty's camp. While the two armies were taking a detour, the collapsed city wall of the city that Gong Sun Meng was stationed in was suddenly blasted open by a huge force. Bai Qi, who was bare-chested and holding a long sword in his hand, rode out on a black horse, followed by a few thousand cavalrymen. Bai Qi raised his long sword and swung it forward, unleashing several dozens of blood-red beams, shattering all the white beams shooting toward him. The sword beams streaked across the lake, and those demonic shooting sun carps quickly hid in the water. When the sword beams streaked across the lake, blood could be vaguely seen spraying out from the water. Obviously, some of the demonic shooting sun carps were injured. Throwing his head back and laughing wildly, Bai Qi raised his long sword up high and cried out, "Honex and little brat, do you dare to fight with me, Bai Qi? Haha, if you don't, then crawl under Grandpa Bai Qi's crotch. Hee, can you really endure the humiliation of being crawled under my crotch?" Standing on a small hill in the middle of the military camp of the Ling dynasty, Han Exen remained perfectly calm and said with a resonant voice, "Wang Baiqi, the murderer? I've long heard that you're a rare famous general, but how could you say such a stupid thing? Han Xin is good at commanding troops, but I'm not interested in fighting you with my bare hands." Clicking his tongue, he said, "You were still in Liangzhu City a few days ago. Why are you here with your army today? Are these the reinforcements you brought? What can 1,000 people do?" Bai Qi laughed out loud and said, "Cut the crap. I don't care what you're good at, as long as you don't dare to fight me alone, you're a useless coward." Han Xin knitted his eyebrows. Ignoring Bai Qi's provocative words, he sneered and said, "Bai Qi, you can't possibly bring only 1,000 people here as reinforcements. Where's your army? You're not going to launch an attack from the back of Han Xin's camp, are you? TSK? Or are you going to launch a surprise attack from my flanks? I don't think your soldiers are digging tunnels under the ground, and you're going to launch a surprise attack from the inside of my camp, are you?" Bai Qi grinned and squeezed his legs. A dark horse, which he had just replaced, was torn into two by Bai Qi. Bai Qi cursed angrily, cursing all 18 generations of Ao Buzan's ancestors. Han Xin's expression flickered as well. He turned to the general next to him and said, "So, even the high-grade Mount of Diyu has been abducted by that Ao Buzan? The mighty king of killers can only ride an ordinary horse into battle? Hee, what a joke." Before the laughter stopped, countless Diyu soldiers suddenly rushed out from a mountain pass to the east of the Ling dynasty's camp. Crazily, these soldiers stripped off their upper bodies, roared, and charged at the Ling dynasty's camp. These soldiers, who had cultivated the cultivation techniques of the human race to at least the realm of First Panga Heaven, ran as fast as the wind, and with just a few leaps and bounds, they arrived before the camp of Ling dynasty. With a straight face, Han Xin waved his hand to the east. Immediately, two squads of soldiers, who were ready for battle, rushed to the east side of the camp and lined up in a long, snake-like formation. Tens of thousands of soldiers raised the specially made crossbows in their hands at the same time. With a loud clapper, the bolts fell like a rainstorm. The bolts, engraved with all kinds of armor-piercing, corrosive, poisonous, explosive runes and other runes, collided head-on with the charging soldiers of Diyu. Thousands of explosive bolts exploded with a power equal to the full-force strike of an upper-tier heaven immortal, blowing away tens of thousands of Diyu's soldiers who were charging at the front. The bodies of every Diyu's soldier who was charging at the front were densely covered with bolts. They were blown far away and fell to the ground in a sorry state. Then, they pulled out the bolts that kept corroding their bodies, lay on the ground and panted for a while. Their wounds healed quickly, and then they continued to charge forward. Only some unlucky soldiers were hit in the head by the explosive bolts, and their heads were blown to pieces, killing them instantly. A deep, muffled drumming rang out, and suddenly, tens of thousands of holes were dug out from the ground to the east of the Ling dynasty's camp. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers poked their upper bodies out of the holes, holding the same crossbows in their hands. The cultivation base of these Ling dynasty soldiers hiding underground was very weak, and some of them probably did not even have the cultivation base of the Jindan realm. But they could pull the crossbows and fire the bolts, and that was enough. The huge array of crossbows whistled through the air, forcibly stopping the charge of De Yu's soldiers. The more the merrier, Han Exin? Han Exin said coldly. Haven't you heard of this saying, the king of killers? A strange gleam flashed across Baichi's eyes as he looked coldly at his subordinates, whose attack was forcibly stopped. On the battlefield of Pangu Continent, Han Exin was the first person to send a large number of soldiers with low cultivation bases to the battlefield. Any human soldier whose cultivation base had reached the realm of First Panga Heaven could easily slaughter tens of thousands of these weak soldiers. But these Ling Dynasty soldiers armed with crossbows were able to stop the hundreds of thousands of De Yu's soldiers from advancing. The eastern mountains of the Ling Dynasty's camp were blanketed by the explosion of arrows. After trying out the effects of various arrows, the Ling Dynasty soldiers brazenly switched to explosive arrows. These arrows could blow the charging De Yu's soldiers back, and if they were lucky, their heads were blown off, effectively killing an enemy. The life force of human soldiers was indeed strong. As long as they stepped on Pangu Continent, they could constantly absorb Pangu's sacred energy to heal their injuries. It was as if the mountains had been ravaged by hundreds of thousands of heavy cannons. Hundreds of thousands of De Yu's soldiers were constantly blown away, and then they jumped up from the ground again and again, charging forward with no regard for their own safety. As long as they could break into the Ling Dynasty's camp, with their absolute advantage in cultivation bases, they would be able to slaughter to their heart's content. A shrill dragon horn sounded, and at the same time, a large number of De Yu's soldiers poured out of the two mountain passes to the west of the Ling Dynasty's camp. Han Exin waved his hand, and the same thing happened. Two groups of soldiers, who had long been ready, strode to the west of the Ling Dynasty's camp. Tens of thousands of hiding places were opened, and the mountains in the west were completely blanketed with arrows. Wu Qi glanced at Huang Liang, whose face was pale, and said coolly, "Look, if it were you, you would have gone straight to the enemy's camp with an army of 1,000,000 soldiers." Han Exin, on the other hand, was already prepared. How are you going to break into his camp? Are you going to fill the trap with more soldiers? Huang Liang bowed his head and said nothing, lost in deep thought. Chapter 1003. In the underground spirit cave, Wu Qi was explaining to Huang Liang the tactics of Baichi and Han Exin. Baichi's tactics conformed to the norm, and there was nothing outstanding about them for the time being. However, Han Exin's tactics were extremely effective. He had fully utilized the advantages of manpower and weapons. There was no need to waste the elite forces to do something that ordinary soldiers could do. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, who were only slightly stronger than mortals, had forcibly withstood the charge of 1,000,000 De Yu soldiers with bows and crossbows. De Yu soldiers were constantly injured and exhausted by the arrows, while the Ling Dynasty's elite army was resting in the camp. When the morale of De Yu's army dropped, the Ling Dynasty's army would charge out, and Baichi would probably suffer a crushing defeat. A battle of 1,000,000 soldiers was a drop in the bucket for both De Yu and the Ling Dynasty. Even if all the soldiers were lost, it would not affect the overall situation. However, it represented the face of Baichi and Han Exin. No matter who lost, it would be a great blow to themselves. Especially since this was the first all-out battle between De Yu and the Ling Dynasty. Whoever won or lost, it would have a great impact on the morale of both countries. Arrows rained down from the sky, and the charging De Yu soldiers on the left and right flanks showed signs of fatigue. Their bodies were still full of energy, but their souls were tired. They had been fighting from noon until dusk, constantly being blasted away by arrows, and then rejoining the battlefield after recovering their strength. It was not a pleasant feeling to be pierced by arrows all over like a hedgehog. Some De Yu soldiers had slowed down. They still had strength, but they no longer had the will to fight. On the hill in the middle of the camp, a few Ling Dynasty generals around Han Exin laughed out loud and complimented Han Exin, "Chief Marshal, that Baichi's tactics are just SOSO. When his soldiers are tired, our elite soldiers will attack them from the front, and will be able to destroy at least half of his army." Han Exin's lips curled up into a faint smile, then he cursed, "What a bunch of stupid pigs. Do you think Baichi is so easy to deal with? Can't you see that he is still standing still in front of the broken wall? Be on your guard at all times, and let's see what other tricks he has up his sleeves. Soon, another hour had passed. More than 10,000 DU soldiers who attacked Han Xian's camp from both flanks had been killed. They were unlucky enough to be shot in the head by arrows, and the exploding arrows had blown their skulls to pieces, completely ending their lives. As for the other soldiers, they had been wounded countless times by the explosions, and some even had their arms and legs blown off. But, nourished by the Pangu's sacred energy, they had regrown their limbs and continued to join the battle. But the repeated wounds and severe pain had tired them out, and the speed and frequency of their attacks were now several times slower than when they had just launched the attack at noon. Some soldiers even stood hesitantly at the back of the line and had not charged for a long time. On the hill, Han Xian glanced at Baichi, who was standing in the distance. He clapped his hands lightly, and a general next to him immediately took out the dragon horn and blew it. The shrill and unpleasant sound of the horn rose straight into the sky, followed by the muffled sound of footsteps. In the camp of Ling Dynasty, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, who had rested and rested for a whole afternoon, slowly left their barracks in heavy armors. In the air above the camp, they formed thousands of small, sharp formations, slowly pressing towards the Great Yu army on both flanks like hungry wolves who were ready to pounce. Oracles of the Ling Dynasty floated above the army, their palms constantly sprinkling down large numbers of bone talismans. Ghost howls rose from all directions, covering the bodies of these Ling Dynasty soldiers with a faint layer of ghost fire, which had a certain defensive and corrosive power, while wisps of dark fire shone out of their eyes. Hundreds of thousands of Ling Dynasty soldiers breathed deeply and deeply at the same time. Their breaths turned into a strong gale, blowing up the sand and dust on the ground. The hesitation and fear in the hearts of these soldiers were dispelled by the magic of the oracles, and the strong will of fighting and the desire of killing had taken control of their minds. These soldiers of the Ling Dynasty had transformed into hundreds of thousands of bloodthirsty beasts, barely maintaining their last trace of sanity and joining the battle. Muffled drumbeats rang out. Behind the battle formation of the Yu army on both flanks, a large number of oracles in black robes appeared. They, too, sprinkled out large numbers of bone talismans and cast all kinds of defensive spells on these soldiers of the Yu army. Some oracles were even incanting spells with shrill voices, sprinkling a large amount of blood-red light to dispel the fatigue of these soldiers and boost their morale, so that they would have the strength to continue the battle. With the help of the oracles, these soldiers of the Yu army, who were already exhausted, were filled with energy as if they had a sudden recovery before death. Roaring, they rushed towards the camp of the Ling Dynasty. The rain of arrows had stopped, and the soldiers of the Ling Dynasty in the caves had fled back to the camp through the underground tunnel. Only hundreds of thousands of elite soldiers of the Ling Dynasty, who had reached the peak of their physical strength and morale, were marching slowly towards them. In the blink of an eye, the armies of both sides were tangled up in a fierce battle. Spears, blades, and swords tore through the air, shredding all the enemies in front of them. The generals of both sides were fighting one-on-one, while the low-ranking officers were fighting crazily with their soldiers, and blood was spilled all over the ground. Over 1 million soldiers of both sides were entangled in a fierce battle, while the oracles of both sides had also joined the battle in the sky. Fire, lightning, ice, wind, and snow swept across the land, throwing and shredding many soldiers into the air. Some of them had their faces suddenly turned black, some were bleeding from their 7 apertures, some were spitting out their tongues, and some were bleeding from their internal organs. Faced with the strange spells cast by the oracles, the soldiers of both sides were either killed or wounded. Han Xian frowned. The strength of the soldiers of the Yu army was beyond his imagination. Basically, it would take 2 to 3 soldiers of the Ling Dynasty army to fight against 1 soldier of the Yu army. After a quarter of an hour of fighting, over 100,000 soldiers of the Ling Dynasty army had been killed or wounded. Although over 90,000 wounded soldiers soon returned to the battlefield, their overall strength had been greatly weakened. The blades of the soldiers of the Du army were tinged with a strange blue color. It was a deadly poison concocted by the oracles of the Du army. Once they were injured by the poison weapons, even if they could recover quickly with the help of the Pangu's sacred energy, they would still lose 20 to 30% of their energy. As the battle went on, although the soldiers of the Du army were exhausted, they were gradually gaining the upper hand. Poisoned weapons? Han Exen raised his long brows and sneered, "Why didn't the oracles of the Ling dynasty concoct this poison?" The generals of the Ling dynasty looked at each other, speechless. All the spells of the oracles of the Ling dynasty were taught to them by the immortals of the celestial court. In order to better control the Ling dynasty and prevent the Ling dynasty from evolving into another Du army, the immortals of the celestial court were not so stupid as to pass down all the spells of the human race they knew. The poisons on the weapons of the soldiers of the Du army not only had a very good effect on weakening the human soldiers, but also had a terrible lethality to the fragile bodies of the immortals. Unless the immortals of the celestial court had a cramp in their brains, they would not even have the time to destroy the recipes of these terrible poisons. How could they teach the oracles of the Ling dynasty army? Han Exen spread his hands helplessly and said with a bitter smile, "I understand now. Well, the soldiers are not as good as the Du army, and the weapons and armaments are not as good as the Du army. If I did not have a set of military formations, I'm afraid this army would have long been wiped out by Du army. How dare they clamor about overthrowing and replacing Du army with such a weak foundation?" The generals of the Ling dynasty did not dare to answer. Han Exen's complaints were not directed at the Ling dynasty, but more at some people in the celestial court. Since Han Exen dared to say something like that, he must have a strong backing. But if these generals dared to say that, they would probably disappear in a few days. After complaining for a while, Han Exen shook his head, shook his hand, and shot a fireball into the sky. The white fireball rose tens of miles high with a long tail of smoke trailing behind it, then exploded and turned into a dazzling ball of light in the sky. The flame lasted for a long time without dissipating, and suddenly, a wild battle cry came from the surrounding woods. Countless cultivators, the strongest of whom were only nascent divinity cultivators, darted out of the woods in the distance, riding sword beams and rushing into the army of Du army. These cultivators hacked their sword beams randomly in all directions, detonated all kinds of thunders and spirit talismans in their hands, and then detonated their own nascent divinity. Although these cultivators had low cultivation bases, the power they produced when they detonated themselves was extremely shocking. There was a strange fishy smell in the blood-red light they produced. When the nearby soldiers of Du army smelled the smell, they instantly felt their bones go numb, and some of them simply fell to the ground, unable to move, letting the soldiers of Ling dynasty cut off their heads like chopping melons and vegetables. Tens of thousands of cultivators rushed into the army of Du army. Their thunders and spirit talismans killed or wounded tens of thousands of soldiers of Du army, and their self-detonation smashed the army of Du army into pieces. The strange smell emanating from their bodies was similar to Wu Qi's drunken dragon incense. The soldiers of Du army collapsed to the ground in rows, and could do nothing but watch as the soldiers of Ling dynasty wielded their weapons and hacked at them. Frowning, Baiqi watched his soldiers wavering, then snapped, "Han Exen, how shameless of you! How could you use poison?" Han Exen snorted coldly and gave Baiqi a mocking glance. Baiqi suddenly realized that the blades of Du army soldiers were also coated with poison. No one said a word, because Han Exen was not the only one who used poison. Immediately, Baiqi corrected himself and said, "You've even used these low-level cultivators. Is there no one else in Ling dynasty who can do this?" Han Exen laughed disapprovingly and said, "Only by using these low-level cultivators to defeat the army led by Baiqi can I show off my skills." Laughing aloud, Han Exen pointed his finger out, and 9 white fireballs shot straight up into the sky. Amidst the deafening explosions, battle cries came from all directions at the same time. More than 200,000 cultivators, who had been hiding in the forest with various escape techniques, charged out in a frenzy. Just like the cultivators who exploded themselves just now, they activated their Thunder talismans and rushed into the Yu army, then exploded their nascent souls and nascent divinities. Streams of spirit light flickered in the air, and the true spirits of these cultivators were sucked away by the light. The Yu army was in a complete mess. The soldiers' steps were weak and feeble, and they did not even have the strength to turn around and flee. The soldiers of Ling dynasty mercilessly killed the Yu army's soldiers, one after another. Baiqi's face turned blue with anger, and he waved his hand forcefully. Meanwhile, Han Exen said carelessly, "Baiqi, this is how I, Han Exen, command my soldiers. Even if they are just a bunch of trash, as long as there are enough of them, I can use them to defeat all the enemies in front of me. Do you have any more tricks up your sleeves? If not, I'll give the order to launch an all-out attack." Baiqi snickered and turned around to look. A Taoist, clad in a green robe and with a bone structure as delicate as an ancient pine, walked slowly out of the city. Chapter 1004. Han Exen trembled with anger. Gnashing his teeth, he pointed at Baiqi and Mu Wang, then turned and left with the generals and the immortals around him. Therefore, the immortals of today were feared by the heavenly Tao, while the ancient immortals were tolerated by the heavenly Tao, who often rewarded them with virtues. The soldiers of the Ling dynasty were finally thrown into confusion. No one knew who shouted first, but the hundreds of thousands of soldiers abandoned their armaments and fled. The Ling dynasty soldiers, whose cultivation bases had reached the realm of the second Panga heaven and the first Panga heaven, ran as fast as the wind and vanished in the blink of an eye. The more the soldiers summoned by Han Exen, the better. Their cultivation bases were low, and they could not run fast enough or defeat the enemy. But they quickly knelt on the ground and put their hands over their heads in surrender. Han Exen's face was unsightly. The Ling dynasty general who shot the arrow was a second Panga heaven cultivator, and his bow was a precious treasure forged by the celestial court. Even a peak-level gold immortal would be killed by it. But Mu Wang, with his mere cultivation base of a 36th tier heaven immortal, was able to deflect the arrow with just a finger. His divine ability and magic were truly exquisite. Shrouded in billowing black smoke, 4,900 puppet warriors rushed to the forefront, slashing down countless soldiers of the Ling dynasty like a rain of blades. The divine man beside Mu Wang was about to step in front of Mu Wang, but Mu Wang chuckled and stopped him. Casually, Mu Wang reached out his right hand and pointed his finger at the arrow, which was less than 10 feet away from him. The arrow disappeared abruptly, and then a golden light reappeared, appearing in front of the Ling dynasty general who had shot the arrow. The general shrieked with fright and twisted his body, letting the arrow pierce through his right chest with a shrill whistle. Blood splattered everywhere. The arrow pierced through the general's body and sank heavily into the ground in front of Han Exen, piercing through the small hill that everyone was on. Baiqi roared with laughter. He gave a few orders in a row, and the soldiers of Yu cheered thunderously. They picked up the bows and crossbows abandoned by the soldiers of Ling dynasty, and led by dozens of generals, they chased after the fleeing army of Ling dynasty. Along with a series of muffled bangs, 4,900 puppet warriors reappeared in the ranks of Ling dynasty warriors. A total of 4,900 puppet warriors swayed in the wind, then abruptly turned into a puff of smoke and dissipated. Following that, a series of banging noises could be heard as these warriors darted out from the ranks of the Ling dynasty soldiers. With a slight swipe of the sharp blades in their hands, 4,900 heads rose into the sky. In the west, half of the face of the setting sun had sunk into the bottom of the mountain. The setting sun was like blood, making the bloody light especially dazzling. A few sighs could be heard coming from the void. Mu Wang, an ancient immortal, had actually turned the tide of the battlefield. Judging from the way he followed behind the Taoist in green, he was clearly some kind of bodyguard. The ancient immortals followed a very different cultivation system from those immortals who were greedy and crazily plundering the resources of heaven and earth. Their magic power was not strong, but their cultivation was very high. Almost all of them had reached the realm where their words were the law, and all kinds of divine abilities and mystic arts were very powerful. They had an endless lifespan, but they used it to explore the mysteries of heaven and earth instead of using it to enhance their own cultivation. His soldiers had fled, and Han Exen had no interest in fighting Baichi alone. With all his soldiers gone, even if Han Exen could kill Baichi, he could not possibly go deep into Diyu alone and attack cities and territories. There was no such thing. Wu Qi's divine sense swept across the deity. Judging from his extremely pure and powerful bloodline, he should be a demigod born from the first generation of gods and human beings after the creation of heaven and earth. At the same time, he possessed the ability to directly control the power of heaven and earth, as well as the endless development potential of the human race. His overall strength had reached the level of 9th-tier primordial immortal. Coupled with his armor and halberd, which were emanating a strange aura, and his special bloodline, perhaps even a primordial immortal who was 2 or 3 tiers higher than him could not fight against him. Staring fixedly at Baichi, Han Exen raised his hand and twirled it in the air. A dull drumbeat rang out, and the disordered soldiers of the Ling dynasty immediately retreated to the center of the camp, forming a purely defensive circular formation. Heavy tower shields were carried out by the soldiers of the Ling dynasty, which smashed heavily into the ground and formed a 30-feet-tall steel wall. A large number of bows and crossbows equipped by the soldiers of the Ling dynasty shot out through the openings reserved on the tower shields, forcibly blocking the pursuit of the soldiers of Diyu. Before his voice had died away, Mu Weng was already laughing. With a casual point of his finger, the ashes of the puppet warriors suddenly rose into the air. Accompanied by a harsh whistling sound, the ashes formed new puppet warriors. The new puppet warriors were pitch black in color, and their bodies were like smoke and mist, making them look like ghosts. Just now, the puppet warriors still had real bodies, but now they were completely made of smoke. With a shrill whistle, they picked up the blades that had fallen to the ground and moved as fast as a breeze through the ranks of the soldiers of the Ling dynasty. Wherever they passed, blood and flesh flew in all directions. Whether it was the soldiers or the generals of the Ling dynasty, none of them could withstand a light blow from the thin blades. Wherever the blades passed, limbs flew in all directions, and one head after another was cut by arrows of blood. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of soldiers of the Ling dynasty were killed on the spot. Han Exion's face flickered slightly. He pointed at Mu Weng, the Taoist in green, and cried out, "Shoot him!" Before Han Exen could give another order, Mu Weng pulled out a stack of thin paper from under his sleeve and threw them into the air. Shouts and shouts could be heard coming from all directions. The paper was so thin that it was almost transparent, and all of them were cut into the shape of human figures. Thousands of paper pieces swayed in the wind and shot out balls of golden light, which transformed into a skinny warrior who stood 12 feet tall, clad in a thin armor and holding a sharp blade in his hand. Han Exen laughed delightedly and said, "Blue Smoke Spirit Lord, your magic is indeed more profound." Behind Han Exen, a general of the Ling dynasty walked quickly out. He was holding a large bow that was almost as tall as a man, and knocked a pure gold arrow that was as thick as a child's arm. A muffled sound rang out, and a golden light burst out as the arrow shot straight toward Mu Weng's heart. The power of this arrow was frighteningly great. As the arrow tore through the air, it tore open a 10-feet-wide fissure in the ground, and all living beings in its path were shredded to pieces by the shockwaves brought about by the sword light. But this time, an immortal clad in a red Taoist robe, who stood next to Han Exen, finally made his move. He gave a long cry as his red Taoist robe suddenly fluttered. Countless fist-sized fire ravens flew out with sharp and unpleasant screeches, shooting across the sky with a high temperature. The puppet warriors were caught unprepared and were pierced through by the fire ravens. Their bodies began to burn rapidly, and in just a blink of an eye, they were turned into ashes and fell to the ground. The faces of these warriors were blurred, and it was obvious that they were not living beings, but puppets. Their armors were dull and did not look like anything good, but the sharp blades in their hands were very eye-catching. They shone brightly as if they were made of crystal. Their reed-like shape was not suitable for hacking, but for cutting. Han Exen shuddered as he cried out, Kill them! Baichi cupped his fist and bowed to the Taoist in indigo. Mu Wang. Obviously, these blades were also forged with a secret art, and were specially used to deal with warriors who practiced the cultivation techniques of the human race. Han Exan pointed a finger at the puppet warriors, and just as he was about to issue an order to gather the crossbows to kill them, the puppet warriors abruptly transformed into wisps of smoke again. Then, a series of bangs rang out as these warriors emerged from other places. With a swing of their blades, another 4,900 heads fell to the ground. The bangs kept ringing out as these warriors came and went in the army of the Ling dynasty like ghosts. Every time they appeared, they could kill 4,900 elite soldiers of the Ling dynasty. The Taoist nodded slightly. Without saying a word, he slapped a fist-sized, green calabash hanging from his waist. The stopper on the calabash was opened, and a stream of clear water with a strong smell of herbs sprayed out. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a drizzle and enveloped the whole battlefield. A fragrance filled the air, and the strange fishy smell emanating from the blood of the self-detonated cultivators of the Ling dynasty was neutralized by the smell of herbs. The Yu soldiers suddenly regained all their energy. They roared excitedly, wielded their weapons, and fought the soldiers of the Ling dynasty again. After flashing 10 times like this, the Ling dynasty had lost 49,000 soldiers. Han Exan was so angry that he almost coughed blood. Mu Wang's secret art was really strange and unpredictable. Although the aura of these puppet warriors was not very strong, their attacking methods were too strange. Obviously, the blades in their hands were magical items that had been thoroughly tempered, and had even subdued the body-strengthening cultivation technique practiced by the human race. Even the most ordinary soldiers of the Ling dynasty had fleshly bodies harder than steel, but before these specially made blades, their bodies were as fragile as tofu. Clad in a thin green robe, the Taoist walked slowly to Baichi's side, nodded smilingly at Han Exan, who was standing on the hill in the distance. A three-eyed celestial being, standing 3 feet tall, clad in a golden Qilin heaven-devouring armor and holding a coiling dragon halberd, stood guard beside the Taoist. His body looked like a shadow made of wind and fire, and from time to time, a dull roar of wind and fire could be heard coming out of him. His body was half real and half incorporeal, and he looked very intimidating. There was a clear circle of meritorious light, 3 feet in diameter, hovering behind the old Taoist's head. His whole body was shrouded in a faint purple mist, and he was full of energy essence. When he walked, it seemed that the wind and clouds around him moved with him. His every move was accompanied by an immortal aura. Compared to him, the immortals of today were like butchers who butchered pigs and sold meat. Their behavior was vulgar and greedy, and they could not be compared at all. Wu Qi could not help but sigh softly. Was this the power of the Yellow Emperor Xinyuan and the Yen Emperor Shenong? How could an ancient immortal, whose cultivation base was only at the level of 36th tier of heaven immortal, be accompanied by a primordial deity as his guard? What was so great about this Taoist? In order to repay the kindness of heaven and earth, the ancient immortals would do their best to maintain the balance of nature. They planted trees, planted grasses, bred all kinds of rare flowers and trees, and even opened up silted rivers to maintain the life cycle of nature. They were kind-hearted and rarely fought with people, and they were not good at killing animals. Basically, every ancient immortal was an expert in the art of medicine, and their favorite thing to do was to travel the world and benefit the world with virtue. Chapter 1005. The sound of horses neighing rang out as Mu Wang pulled out a wooden carriage model from his sleeve. He tossed it onto the ground, and an earthy light flashed as a 4-wheeled chariot drawn by 3 horses appeared before Bai Qi and the others. The chariot was tens of feet in circumference, large enough to accommodate dozens of people. Bai Qi boarded the chariot with all the captains, surrounded by Mu Wang, and quickly chased after Han Exan's fleeing army. 3 lifelike wooden horses threw their heads back and roared into the sky. Every time their hooves knocked on the ground, a circle of yellow light would spread out. Pulled by them, The chariot moved like a gust of wind, and soon caught up with De Yu's soldiers who were chasing after the chariot. From the chariot, Baichi kept issuing orders, and the Great Yu army, which had been chasing after the chariot on their own, immediately regrouped and lined up into a formation of 9 sharp cones, charging forward fiercely. At the 2 flanks of the cone-shaped formation, there were soldiers with heavy shields protecting them. At the center of each formation was a group of black-clothed oracles. The formation protected these oracles in the middle, preventing them from being attacked in the chaos. In the spirit cave under East Sea City, Wu Qi nodded and said, "Huang Liang, you have to see it clearly. Even if the enemy is defeated, you have to be prepared to fight back at any time when you are chasing after them. Han Xian's strategy is not so simple." Huang Liang nodded thoughtfully as he looked at the fleeing and chasing armies on the light screen. Narrowing his eyes, Wu Qi smiled faintly. He glanced around at the civil and military officials of East Sea, who were watching the battle on the light screen with rapt attention. Then, he sent all kinds of military books and countless examples of battles from his memory into their spiritual oceans. In the heaven-refining cauldron, the Shenyuan sword suddenly let out a deep sword cry, and a terrible aura of killing spread out in the spirit cave. Except for Wu Qi, Princess Xianglu, and Yi Xia, all the others trembled, and their hair stood on end. Closing his eyes, Wu Qi immersed his mind in the heaven-refining cauldron. The transformation of these treasures of virtue was almost complete, especially the Shenyuan sword. Under Wu Qi's skillful hands, it had turned from a sword of the way of the king into a downright dominating sword, a pure sword of slaughter. A terrible killing intent surged in the spirit cave, and countless examples of battles were rolling in Huang Liang and the others' spiritual oceans. The killing intent stimulated their minds and drew them into the endless war plans. Comparing the examples of battles taking place on the light screen, the eyes of Huang Liang and the others flickered, as if they had learned something. A fierce aura of war spread out from their bodies, as if countless soldiers were roaring furiously in the spirit cave. The De Yu army, led by Baichi, had been chasing after the defeated soldiers of the Ling dynasty for 4 hours. After running for over 2,000 miles, the terrain in front of them gradually leveled off, revealing a vast area of hills. The remaining hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the Ling dynasty fled into the hills, and the soldiers of De Yu who were in high spirits plunged into the hills as well. A deep laughter suddenly came from all directions, and then a clear voice of a man rang out, "Da Qin has killed Wang Baichi? I've been waiting for you for a long time." Clad in a white crane cloak, with a sword hanging from his waist and a feather fan in his hand, Xiao He descended slowly from a cloud in the sky. He glanced at Baichi from tens of miles away. His 3 pupils spun rapidly, and a large number of strange patterns of light appeared in his eyes. The natural energy within 1,000 miles of him fluctuated chaotically. With a wave of his hand, Xiao He shone brightly in the hills around him, while numerous restrictive runes emerged from the ground like blooming flowers. Accompanied by a deep rumble of natural energy, a huge restrictive formation sealed off the void within a radius of 10,000 miles, preventing anyone below the level of primordial immortal from flying. A loud rumble rang out from the ground, and the earth rumbled as a neat and clean rock formation, 100 miles long, a mile thick, and 3,000 feet high, rose whistling out of the ground, blocking the back of Baichi's chariot and cutting off the retreat of Baichi and the others. Then, accompanied by a deafening rumble, 3 more rock formations emerged from the ground, forming an impenetrable city with the first rock formation and surrounding the hills. Nearly 100,000 routed Ling dynasty soldiers and all De Yu's pursuers were trapped in the city wall, which measured 100 miles in both width and length. The high and thick rock stratum was densely engraved with countless rune formations, and a thick curtain of light wrapped around the rock stratum. There was no need to attempt to attack. Everyone who witnessed all this knew how strong the defensive power of the rock stratum was. Ambushes had been set up in all directions, and more than 1 million Ling dynasty soldiers rushed out of countless caves like ants in a nest. Shouting and yelling, they rushed up to the city which Xiao He had raised from the ground with a great amount of magic. All kinds of heavy ordnance were neatly stacked on the wall, locking onto the hundreds of thousands of DU soldiers in the city. Baichi's expression flickered slightly as he sneered and said, "Han Exen, little boy, can you lure Baichi here with the lives of so many soldiers?" Han Exen slowly flew up into the sky, looked at Baichi, and said with a smile, "The merciful do not lead the army." In order to wipe out King of Wuan's army and boost the morale of the Ling dynasty, what's the big deal about sacrificing some soldiers? Inside the city, nearly 100,000 Ling dynasty soldiers, who were also trapped in the city, were howling and howling. They were desperately pounding the wall in front of them, crying and begging their colleagues on the wall to let them out. The heavy ordnance on the wall glowed coldly. Once an attack was launched, this 100-mile-long hill would certainly turn into a hell. But the faces of the soldiers on the wall did not change at all. Even when a general of the one-star realm of the second Panga heaven tried to jump onto the wall, a general on the wall slashed him back to the ground without hesitation. With a smile, Han Exen pointed at the soldiers of Diyu and said, "Sons of the Ling dynasty, if you want to live, fight them with all your might. Kill them all, and you can live, and you will have made a great contribution. You will be rewarded with high positions, generous salaries, wine, and beauties. Fight with all your might. If anyone can kill Baichi, he will be promoted 3 ranks on the spot. I, Han Exen, will keep my word." With a few strange laughs, Han Exen said in a gloomy voice, "If you don't fight with all your might, if you surrender or escape from this city, you will be regarded as traitors. Not only will you be punished by military law, but your parents and wives will also be demoted to slaves. If your wives and daughters are good-looking, they may be sent to the musical house, and your comrades in arms who have made meritorious service will dote on them." Standing on the chariot, Baichi looked at Han Exen 100 miles away and said with a sneer, "Han Exen, don't you think this is too sinister?" Han Exen folded his arms over his chest, looked at Baichi coldly, and said with a smile, "As long as I can defeat Wang Baichi of Daqin, what's the big price?" Suddenly he snapped, "What are you waiting for? Where is the fighting pill distributed to you before the battle? Everyone, take the fighting pill and fight the enemy with all your might." A roar like that of a wounded beast was heard. The general of the Ling dynasty, who had just tried to jump onto the wall but was cut down by his colleague, pulled out a thumb-sized blood-colored pill from under his collar. He looked back at Han Exen with a venomous glare before swallowing the pill in one gulp. A miserable howl rang out, and blood-red flames spurted out from the 7 orifices of the general. His body swelled up to 30 feet tall amidst the terrifying crackling of his bones. His muscles swelled up, and even the armor on his body burst apart. At this moment, the general, who was only in the realm of the 1 star of the second Panga heaven, suddenly burst out with an aura equivalent to the peak of the 9 stars realm. He transformed into a blood-colored bolt of lightning, dashed across a dozen miles, and hacked down at the soldiers of Diyu, who had lined up in a square formation. With a deafening clang, dozens of heavy shields and iron armors shattered, and nearly 100 soldiers of Diyu were chopped to pieces. The soldiers of Diyu were only in the realm of the 8 or 9 stars of the first Panga heaven. Facing the attack of the peak of the second Panga heaven, they were as fragile as tofu. When the soldiers of Diyu saw this, they all took out blood-colored pills from under their collars and stuffed them into their mouths. Shrill howls rang out as blood-colored flames sprayed out of the 7 apertures of all the soldiers of Ling dynasty. At least 70,000 soldiers were burned to ashes, but the remaining 20,000 soldiers, like the general, expanded to about 30 feet tall, transformed into blood-colored bolts of lightning, and charged at the army of Diyu. Above the city, Han Exen stood on a cloud that kept flashing with a bright light. "Tell those monsters of the forbidden clans that the death rate after taking this pill is too high," he said coolly. "How could so many soldiers die in a real battle? Well, this formation is very powerful. Even with the help of this flying treasure, I've consumed 30% of my energy. Xiao He, can you lower the power of the formation a little?" Xiao He smiled. Hovering under his feet was also a cloud that was flashing with a bright light. All right, don't complain about this," he said coolly. "We've already gained a great advantage by being able to fly within the range of the formation. Well, if we can kill Baichi today, that would be great. Han Exen was taken aback. He gave Xiao He a look in shock, then turned to look at Baichi, who was commanding the soldiers to resist the attack of the Ling dynasty soldiers. Suddenly, he grinned and said, "Isn't that right? If we can kill Baichi or capture him alive, that would be great." With a wave of his hand, the drums on the city walls began to beat like thunder, while countless arrows, talismans, flames, and thunderbolts swept across the battlefield like a storm, regardless of the tens of thousands of Ling dynasty soldiers who were still in the city. All of a sudden, Mu Wen gave a long roar. As he waved his sleeves, a green banana leaf rose into the sky and transformed into a green mist that enveloped the Deyu army. Arrows, talismans, and other weapons exploded the mist, making it tremble. Flames and thunderbolts tore large cracks in it, but the green mist was inexhaustible. It rose and fell, blocking the fierce attacks of the Ling dynasty and firmly protecting the Deyu soldiers down below. Baichi grinned in a weird way. Suddenly, he waved his hand towards the sky. A dark sphere of flame rose into the sky along with shrill ghost howls. Boom! A dark sphere of flame exploded in the night sky. The night had just fallen, and the surroundings were dark. But the dark flame was so dazzling in the night sky that it could be clearly seen from tens of thousands of miles away. 4 supreme towers abruptly emerged from behind the 4 city walls of the city. Bright light poured down, and from the light, troops of heavily armored Deyu soldiers rushed out. Each supreme tower was loaded with over 1 million Deyu soldiers. They formed orderly battle formations and firmly surrounded the 100-mile square city from all directions. Accompanied by shrill ghost howls, the black arrows of light fell from the sky. Wherever they passed, the walls crumbled and the earth cracked, while raging flames and poisonous smoke blanketed the world. The soldiers of the Ling dynasty howled and shrieked under the rain of black arrows, and thousands of them were killed with every snap of a finger. Baichi's backup plan had arrived. Chapter 1006. Inside and outside the city, the battle cries were deafening. Baichi was never a kind-hearted man. As soon as the 4 supreme towers brought his ambush army to the battlefield, he immediately launched a counterattack against the Ling dynasty army. From all directions, millions of Great Yu army soldiers launched tide-like attacks on the city. Arrows and talismans tore the void apart and made the thick city wall tremble. A group of generals around Baichi made their moves, cooperating with the elite soldiers to fight the Ling dynasty soldiers who had taken the warlord pill. The generals around Baichi were all elites of the Qin dynasty. Over the years in the East Sea, with the wholehearted support of Wu Qi, at least nearly 100 generals around Baichi were now strong enough to step into Hongmeng Panga Heaven at any time, while most of the others were at the peak of the second Panga Heaven. With their overall strength and the hundreds of thousands of Deyu soldiers, they steadily blocked the path of the Ling dynasty soldiers who had taken the warlord pill and turned mad, wearing out their energy bit by bit. The explosive power of these Ling dynasty soldiers was extremely strong, but the warlord pill was a great power that overdrew their spirit blood. In just a quarter of an hour, all Ling dynasty soldiers exploded and died at the same time. After a quarter of an hour of fighting, no more than 1,000 Deyu soldiers were killed or wounded. But these 20,000 Ling dynasty soldiers exploded, sending their blood and body parts across 100 miles in radius. Over 100,000 Deyu soldiers were stained by the blood that sprayed out when they exploded. The corrosive blood burned through their bodies, and a strange poison spread in their bodies, killing their souls. 100,000 elite soldiers fell to the ground. Their bodies melted quickly and turned into dark, sticky, poisonous liquid, burning the ground and making it sizzle. The people who witnessed all this were shocked. Han Exen murmured in a low voice, "Those monsters from the forbidden clans, the things they concoct are indeed vicious. We have to be careful when dealing with them in the future. We can never take the pills they concoct." Xiaohe's face was also full of fear. He sighed in a low voice and said, "We can talk about the pills of the forbidden clans later. What do we do now?" This bastard Bai Qi actually used supreme high priests to transport the ambush troops. This was simply preposterous. All the supreme oracles of the Ling dynasty have eyes on their foreheads, and it is impossible to count on them to help us. Why are the supreme oracles of Diyu so obedient? Han Exen was furious as well. If he had a few supreme oracles of the Ling dynasty to help him, he would have definitely devised more vicious traps to kill Baiqi. But the few supreme oracles of the Ling dynasty were extremely proud and arrogant. Even Zhang Tingyun had to be polite to them, and Han Xian could not mobilize any of them to help him in the battle. Han Xian's jealousy and resentment went without saying when he saw that there were 4 supreme oracles around Baiqi to help him transport the soldiers. Baiqi narrowed his eyes and looked at Han Exen and Xiao He in the distance. Through the movement of their lips, Baiqi could see what they were saying. Baiqi could not help but burst into wild laughter, his voice full of pride and arrogance. The supreme oracles of Diyu were very proud, and they did not like the courtiers of the 6 states. But the emperor of Duqin, Yingjing, was the reincarnation of Emperor Yang Su, the sacred emperor of the human race. As Yingjing's confidant, which supreme oracle of Diyu dared not to give Baiqi face when he issued a military order. All the provisions and other supplies of Baiqi's army were stored in the supreme towers of some supreme oracles, not to mention the soldiers. Who on Panga continent had the ability to use supreme oracles as the logistics and transportation team. Full of enthusiasm, Baiqi drew his sword and cried out, "Boys, kill, kill, kill all the traitors of the Ling dynasty. Take no prisoners in this battle." The soldiers of the Ling dynasty, whose morale had fallen, could hardly resist the attacks of Diyu's army. What was even worse was that the 4 supreme oracles were casting spells to attack these ordinary soldiers from all 4 sides of the city wall, which was almost like cheating. Even though they were only using the most common spells, the 4 supreme oracles were still beating the millions of soldiers of the Ling dynasty so hard that they could not even lift their heads. Amidst the shrill ghost howls, the black arrows of light came whistling down from the sky. All the soldiers of the Ling dynasty who were touched by the exploded black mist festered and died, and all their blood essence was sucked dry by the ghosts and deities hidden in the mist. The 4 supreme oracles stood proudly on the supreme towers that hovered in midair. With a casual point of their fingers, tens of thousands of arrows of light shot out and mercilessly harvested the lives of the soldiers of the Ling dynasty. Occasionally, some daring generals of the Ling dynasty would leap up and attack the 4 supreme oracles, but before they could get close to the supreme towers, they would shriek miserably and turn into pus and blood and die. If one were to look carefully with the Dharma eyes, one would find that the air around the 4 supreme towers was filled with billions of mosquitoes that were several times smaller than dust. These venomous goo bugs had turned into spiral-shaped clouds and protected the 4 supreme towers. If any enemy dared to come close, the goo bugs would immediately burrow into their 7 orifices and release their poison to kill them. The soldiers of the Ling dynasty on the walls were in a state of confusion, and they were about to be routed again. But Baiqi himself flew up and lunged at Han Exen and Xiao He. "Han Exen boy, and that 3-eyed freak beside you, is his name Xiao He? Come and fight me, your grandpa Baiqi. If I can't kill you with 3 strikes, I'll let your remaining soldiers retreat safely. What do you say?" Without saying a word, Han Exen and Xiao He turned and left. Baiqi had the cultivation base of the 7 stars realm of the 3rd Panga heaven, and his overall strength was strong enough to fight against a primordial immortal. Han Exen and Xiao He were still a long way from the realm of primordial immortal. Unless they were out of their minds, they would not risk their lives to fight a fierce man like Baiqi. Without saying a word, Han Exen and Xiao He turned and fled. Dozens of generals of the Ling dynasty who were loyal to their master leaped up and tried to stop Baiqi, but Baiqi easily chopped off their heads with a sword. Now that Baiqi's cultivation base had reached the realm of Hongmeng Panga heaven, his sword strike was like an antelope hanging its horn. Although it was a killing move, it had a wonderful charm to it. The generals of the Ling dynasty who were killed even died with a smile on their faces. Baiqi's sword strike was too beautiful. Han Exen and Xiao He turned and fled, while Baiqi laughed and chased after them in a beam of white light. The cloud that kept flashing under Han Xian and Xiao He's feet was a flying magical treasure crafted by an almighty expert, and its speed was not slow. As Baiqi's cultivation technique was not good at flying, he could only barely keep up with them. In the blink of an eye, they had traveled hundreds of miles. Han Xian and Xiao He suddenly turned and looked at Baiqi with a smile. Baiqi's heart skipped a beat. Lao Tzu has been fooled. Two shameless boys. How dare they use an army of 1,000,000 soldiers as bait? He cried out harshly. With a cold snort, Baiqi turned and fled in the direction of the city. But when he had just flown hundreds of feet away, a jade-colored light sprinkled down from the sky, transforming into a crystal-clear and seemingly thin jade-colored ice wall that blocked in front of Baiqi. Baiqi's fist smashed on the ice wall. A crisp clang rang out. The counterforce, which was 3 times stronger than Baiqi's punch, bounced back and broke Baiqi's wrist immediately. Baiqi was horrified. "Who are you?" he cried out sternly. A strong Pangu's sacred energy rose from the ground and quickly wrapped up Baiqi's body, healing the injury on his wrist very quickly. The jade-colored ice wall appeared in all directions, transforming into a complicated formation in the shape of an 8 trigrams, trapping Baiqi in the center. The formation had a circumference of nearly 100 miles, and there was enough space for 2 people to fight inside. The jade-colored ice wall emitted a cold air, and soon, a thin layer of ice formed on the edge of Baiqi's sword. A silvery dragon roar echoed out, and a tiny and adorable jade-colored little dragon darted out of the void. A beautiful lady clad in a white Taoist robe, holding a jade-colored vase in her left hand and a 6-feet-long sword in her right hand, proudly trod on the back of the little dragon. She stared at Baiqi coldly and said, "Murderer Wang Baiqi? I'm Yulong, a true disciple of the Supreme Emperor Huang Zhengtian, sect master Xian Luo. I was ordered to kill you." Snorting coldly, Yulong shook her head and said, "A villainous man with bloody hands like yours should have perished long ago. Why do you still stay in the human world and wreak havoc?" Baiqi chuckled, raised his sword, and said, "Don't try to show off your eloquence, little girl. I'm killing for His Majesty of Daqin, for Daqin." Even though Baiqi has killed countless people, he did it in a righteous and honorable way. Lao Tzu has never killed people with schemes. Compared to you thieves and prostitutes who talk about morality, justice, and righteousness, Lao Tzu's heart is pure and open. Yulong snorted coldly and said in a low voice, "Stubborn man, you deserve to die. If you can join the Ling dynasty." Baiqi raised his eyebrows. Having been a military officer for so many years, Baiqi was a real ruffian. Immediately, he laughed and continued Yulong's words, "If I can join the Ling dynasty, can your mother marry Lao Tzu?" The jade dragon was so angry that her face turned purple. She let out a long roar, and the little jade dragon she was sitting on suddenly twisted its body, breaking through the void and arriving in front of Baiqi. Yulong wielded her sword and hacked fiercely towards Baiqi. The sword in her hand was a fully formed primordial divine weapon. The sword beam tore the void apart, and a vague silhouette of a dragon could be seen in it, incanting spells and making hand gestures, increasing the power of the sword beam by at least 2 times. Laughing coldly, Baiqi swung the sword and cried out, "Get lost! Where did this little girl come from? How dare you fight me?" A monstrous murderous aura rushed out. Yulong and Xiaoyalong cried out at the same time. The strong and brutal murderous aura was not something that should exist in the mortal world. The silhouette of the dragon in her sword beam was disrupted, and the power of the sword beam was reduced by at least 70%. Baiqi's sword collided with Yulong's. A crisp sound rang out, and the primordial divine weapon flew out of Yulong's hand. Her right hand was smashed to a pulp, blood and flesh splashing in all directions, and her smooth, purple-gold hand bone was full of cracks. What Baiqi was practicing was the body-strengthening technique of the human race, which belonged to the branch of body cultivators. And what Yulong was practicing was the orthodox code of Dao League, which belonged to the first class of Dharma cultivators. Was it not courting death for a Dharma cultivator to fight a body cultivator at close range with a sword? Yulong cried out in alarm. Xiaoyalong twisted his body and quickly fled dozens of miles away with her. Bai Qi's sword slashed out, narrowly missing the jade dragon's neck as it slid down. A ripping noise rang out as the sword hacked down from Yulong's back. Yulong's beautiful face turned deathly pale because of the pain. Furious, Yulong shook her left hand, and a tiny stream of jade-colored watery light shot out from the jade bottle, hitting Bai Qi in a flash. Bai Qi gave a muffled snort as his body was instantly frozen by a jade-colored Xian Bing. Chapter 1007. Jade Dragon Fairy was a peak-level gold immortal, and she held a chaotic spirit treasure, the Xianming crystal bottle, which had the power to freeze the void. She was the direct disciple of Huang Zhengtian, the Dao League's Grand Master of Xianluo sect, who was a peak-level primordial immortal and a pivotal figure in the Dao League. In the 33 heavens of Dao League, 3 major sects were established on each day, and under each sect were 3 smaller sects: a direct disciple, an external disciple, and a protector. Xianluo sect was the direct disciple of Huang Zhengtian's Zenith Heaven sect, and the sect master of Zenith Heaven sect was Xianluo Hierarch's master, as well as the direct disciple of Qing Mei Daozu of Dao League. Therefore, Jade Dragon Fairy was a true descendant of Dao League, and Xianluo Hierarch liked her very much. That was why she held the Xianming crystal bottle with her peak-level gold immortal cultivation base, and was an expert in formations. Ordinary primordial immortals were no match for her. But today, she was so angry with Bai Qi that she foolishly swung her sword and fought Bai Qi in close combat. As a result, she was seriously wounded by Bai Qi with just 2 strikes. If her mount, Xiaoyalong, was not psychic and had the divine ability to travel through the void, she would have been killed by Bai Qi. Furious, Jade Dragon Fairy immediately activated the Xianming crystal bottle. A stream of innate Xianming true water sprayed out and froze Bai Qi in a thick block of ice. Every cell in his body was completely frozen, and even his soul was frozen into an ice cube. Except for a trace of warmth in his heart, which was still beating, Bai Qi's body had turned into a block of ice both inside and out. If it were anyone else, even a body cultivator who specialized in body tempering, who was frozen by the Xianming true water, their souls would have perished by now, and even their bodies would have been frozen into ice shards. However, a monstrous killing intent within Bai Qi's body resisted the terrifying cold energy of the nether true water, barely maintaining a trace of his life force. The heavily injured Jade Dragon Fairy rode Xiaoyalong back to Bai Qi angrily. The air around Bai Qi was frozen by the cold air, and the huge block of ice floated in the air, unable to move. Jade Dragon Fairy gritted her teeth and stared at Bai Qi's shocked face in the transparent ice. She sneered, "How dare you be so rude? Today, I will make you suffer a fate worse than death." Trembling, she took out a few life-saving elixirs and stuffed them into her mouth. Then she transformed 2 elixirs into 2 balls of spiritual energy and wrapped them around her right arm and back. The Jade Dragon Fairy took a few deep breaths. The skin and flesh on her arm quickly grew back. The skin and flesh on her back that was cut off also recovered quickly. She gritted her teeth and sneered, "How dare a vulgar man from the mortal world hurt my precious body? You may not be able to avoid death, but you can't escape punishment either." Turning around, Jade Dragon Fairy smiled at Han Xian and Xiao He and said, "Generals, the enemy's general has surrendered. I'll go with you now and kill those 4 monsters one by one. As for the matter of wiping out the Great Yu army, it's up to you." Han Xian and Xiao He looked at each other in horror. What was Bai Qi's cultivation base? He was the existence of Hongmeng Panga Heaven, and his freakishly strong fleshly body could not even be damaged by a huge mountain. But now, he was frozen into a living dead by a stream of water released by the inconspicuous purifying bottle in Jade Dragon Fairy's hand. Both of them could not help but marvel inwardly. This was the power that a Dao sect should have. Even an ordinary peak-level gold immortal female disciple was protected by such a precious treasure. How could any other power have so many treasures to give to their disciples? Han Xian and Xiao He, who were frightened by Bai Qi's pursuit, suddenly felt refreshed. They puffed out their chests and said with a smile, "As you said, as long as we kill those 4 old monsters, we'll deal with the rest." Jade Dragon Fairy smiled complacently. Just as she was about to bring Han Xian and Xiao He to wipe out the Great Yu army, Bai Qi, who was sealed in the ice, suddenly opened his eyes. It was a pair of eyes without any black or white, completely formed by bloody light. A monstrous murderous aura burst out of the ice in the form of a blood mist. Inside Bai Qi's body came the crazy cries of hundreds of millions of soldiers, as well as the shrill howls of countless beheaded soldiers before they died. Such a fierce murderous aura made Jade Dragon Fairy tremble. Xiao Yulong, who was sitting on her back, screamed and quickly fled into the void with Jade Dragon Fairy. A cracking sound rang out. In the horrified eyes of Xiao He and Han Xian, the Xian Bing, which sealed Bai Qi, had a few very fine cracks on it. From the cracks, a blood mist kept bursting out, turning into a twisted, hazy figure that hovered around Bai Qi. Blood evil fighting soul. Han Xian gritted his teeth and gave a low growl. These were the blood evil fighting souls, which were formed by a matchless ferocious god who had killed countless people and had been strengthened by the fighting will of countless iron-blooded soldiers. Just like those strange creatures of the Buddhist League who were formed by the power of faith, they were born with killing and fighting will, and their only purpose in coming to this world was to fight and kill. Tens of thousands of blood evil fighting souls threw their heads back and let out long howls, which made the cracks on the Xian Bing even clearer. Bai Qi let out a strange laugh. His body was shrouded in a blood-red light, and his murderous aura was so strong that it almost seemed solid, forcing Han Xian and Xiao He to keep retreating. Even though they had retreated quickly, the murderous aura that was as sharp as a blade still tore several deep wounds on Han Xian and Xiao He's bodies, revealing their bones. Han Xian and Xiao He looked at each other in horror, and at the same time, they felt a strong sense of helplessness. Wang Baiqi, the murderous god, really deserves his reputation. Why did Baiqi have the cultivation base equivalent to that of a primordial expert, while they were only gold immortals? What kind of fate did Baiqi encounter in the East Sea that allowed him to cultivate to the realm of primordials so quickly? It's very cold. Baiqi's voice rang through the void. Little girl, I'm going to cut you into pieces. Amidst a cracking sound, the Xian Bing finally shattered. Baiqi, with a thin layer of ice still hanging on his skin, rushed out of the Xian Bing with a monstrous murderous aura, and slashed at the Jade Dragon Fairy, who was dozens of miles away. The Jade Dragon Fairy's face darkened. With a shake of her left palm, a jade-colored cold light shot out of the Xianming crystal bottle, which turned into a thin ice wall in front of her. A loud boom rang out, and the ice wall trembled slightly. The sword beam that Baiqi had unleashed exploded into countless tiny fragments of energy, filling the air in a chaotic manner and causing the ice wall that had sealed off this part of the void to make clanking sounds. Not allowing Baiqi to slash out a second time, the Xianming crystal bottle sprayed out a large sheet of sparkling jade-colored water light, which turned into a huge net and swooped down, wrapping Baiqi in it again. It was different from the extremely thin line of water light the first time. This time, the water light covered an extremely wide area, and the amount of Xianming true water was extremely large. Baiqi and the tens of thousands of blood-fiend fighting souls around him were sealed in ice. No matter how hard he struggled, he could not break free. The blood-colored mist wrapped around Baiqi and helped him eliminate at least 70% of the cold. Even so, he was still sealed in the Xian Bing, which was a few miles thick. The Jade Dragon Fairy gave a cold snort and cried out in a low voice, "Generals, quickly assemble the army and annihilate the Great Yu army. Yulong will kill the 4 supreme oracles, and then we'll deal with this peerless murderer. How many people has he killed? Why does he have such a bloody aura?" Han Xian and Xiao He smiled bitterly. Perhaps only God knew how many people Baiqi had killed. When he was still in the mortal world, he had killed 400,000 surrendered soldiers in the Battle of Chongping, and when he arrived on Myriad Immortals' planet, he had wiped out countless kingdoms and slaughtered countless natives. When he arrived on Pangu continent, Baiqi was the vanguard of Daqin and the East Sea, and no one knew how many people he had killed. Just with his murderous aura, he was able to withstand the power of a chaotic spirit artifact. This Baichi truly deserved the title of peerless murderer. Jade Dragon Fairy twisted her waist and was about to drive Xiaoi along toward the 4 supreme oracles when 2 thick arms suddenly wrapped around Jade Dragon Fairy's waist. An unpleasant laugh rang out. Hee hee, what a beautiful girl. What do you think? This is what they call, fate brings us together. Damn it, Lao Tzu has made it clear. Who dares to take Lao Tzu's descendants as mounts? Snatching the crystal bottle from Jade Dragon Fairy's hand, the man laughed complacently and said, "If you dare to ride Lao Tzu's descendants, Lao Tzu will ride you. TSK, you have a slender waist and long legs, it must be a pleasure to ride you. I'll whip Lao Tzu again and again until you scream miserably. Wonderful, wonderful. Hurry up and give birth to a baby for Lao Tzu." The man who emerged from behind Jade Dragon Fairy like a ghost and snatched the crystal bottle was none other than Ao Buzan. This guy had just unified the dragons, and he had taken away more than 90% of the best mounts from various powers. Out of sheer boredom, he wandered around, trying to find a few unlucky fellows to have fun with. When he saw that Jade Dragon Fairy dared to use dragons as mounts, Ao Buzan flew into a rage. Then his anger ignited the fire of lust, turning his anger into desire. Without hesitation, he put his arms around Jade Dragon Fairy and began to fondle her. The poor Jade Dragon Fairy was only a peak-level gold immortal, while Ao Buzan had stepped into the realm of Dao breaking. On top of that, he had regained the cultivation base he had in his previous life, and his divine abilities had reached an unfathomable level. Being hugged by Ao Buzan, the Jade Dragon Fairy was scared out of her wits and could not struggle. But the strange aura emanating from Ao Buzan made the blood in Jade Dragon Fairy's veins expand, and a feeling of lust rose in her heart. Han Xin and Xiao He were startled. Almost instinctively they cried out, "Let go of Jade Dragon Fairy, you evildoer!" Ao Buzan turned around and gave Han Xin and Xiao He a glare. Then, an enormous divine sense of a Dao-breaking expert surged toward them. Blood sprayed out from their 7 orifices, and they were knocked thousands of miles away by the invisible divine sense. Before they could figure out what had happened, they had fainted. Ao Buzan put his arms around Jade Dragon Fairy and kissed her impatiently. "Sweetheart, no one is in our way here. Let's hurry up and play with each other. You and I are brought together by fate. You are riding Lao Tzu's descendant, and now Lao Tzu is riding you. If this is not fate, what is it?" Suddenly, a green palm came whistling down from the sky. "Let go of my disciple, evildoer."